before whom I stand as the living Lord, the God of Israel." These commanding words marked Elijah's dramatic entrance onto the pages of Scripture and into a corrupted realm that had turned away from God. Tonight's sleep story welcomes you to explore every single chapter of this extraordinary prophet's existence, starting with his bold challenge to the evil King Ahab and ending with his spectacular departure in a fiery chariot. My voice will remain slow and peaceful, creating an ideal atmosphere for contemplating eternal spiritual wisdom as you drift gently into slumber. Now, settle into your pillow, draw in a slow breath, and get ready for transport back to Israel in ancient days. However, before settling in completely, if content like this brings you relaxation, think about tapping that like button and subscribing to our channel. Additionally, share with us your current location and the hour where you are. We're creating a worldwide family right here. We truly value your encouragement and participation. Now then, without any more delay, shall we start our journey together? Introduction. During the golden warmth of days long past, centuries before the modern era came into being, there existed a figure whose identity continues to resonate down through the hallways of religious history. This was Elijah, a messenger of God, whose existence reads like fabric interwoven with strands of bravery, uncertainty, amazement, and sacred intention. His narrative opens during troubled years when Israel as a kingdom had wandered far from its foundation. As you recline tonight and take in these words, we shall travel side by side across low places and high peaks, experiencing seasons without moisture and times of downpour, witnessing flames and gentle murmurs. What Elijah's path offers extends beyond mere historical record. It provides us insight into the soul of humanity as it comes face to face with the eternal. Why does Elijah matter so much? It may be because within his account we discover our own experiences reflected. Those instances when he displayed incredible fortitude, standing by himself against countless adversaries. Those periods when fear overtook him and he fled for safety. The quiet seasons when he remained still, awaiting direction. The fearless moments when he declared undeniable truth. In all of these, we recognize images of our personal battles and victories. The era before Elijah's appearance was one marked by change and upheaval. That unified realm constructed under David's leadership and later Solomon's reign had fractured into separate pieces. Kin turned against kin in conflict. The kingdom of Israel in the northern region and the kingdom of Judah to the south now existed as divided nations, frequently in opposition to one another. This separation cut more profoundly than mere governmental structures. It penetrated to the very essence of a nation, attempting to recall its true identity. Up in the Northern Territory, where this account takes place, monarchs rose to power and fell in rapid sequence. Some departed through death from natural causes, while others met their end through conspiracies and plots that would quicken your pulse. Yet not this evening. This night, we speak gently of such matters, allowing history's heaviness to lull you softly toward rest. The territory itself appeared to echo this internal disorder. Hills that rolled on for miles descended into valleys carved deep into the earth. Plains rich with fertility contrasted sharply against unforgiving desert wastelands. The Jordan River continued its eternal flow, possibly wondering why those who drew sustenance from its waters could not discover that same harmony in flowing together as one. Into this turbulent world came Elijah. No announcement of noble lineage heralded his arrival. No royal dwelling raised him, surrounded by luxury and privilege. He appeared from a humble settlement known as Tishbe, located in Gilead's region on the eastern side of the Jordan. An ordinary individual, so it would appear, yet one whose utterances would rattle the very bedrock of entire kingdoms. As heaviness settles over your eyelids, envision this improbable messenger, a rough cloak against sun-darkened flesh. Eyes bright and filled with determination, a spirit aligned with a voice that most had ceased listening for. Here begins our path alongside Elijah of Tishbe, a name that translates to, "My God is Yahweh." His very identity served as a living testimony during an age when such unwavering conviction was growing dim and fading away. Find rest now, while we make ready to accompany this exceptional individual. Allow his account to wrap around you like comforting warmth on an evening with a chill in the air. We shall walk further down this path come tomorrow, yet for this moment, simply draw breath and recognize that even during the darkest of periods, illumination discovers a pathway through the shadows. Historical and cultural context. Israel and Judah in the time of the prophets. The gentle radiance from oil lamps in earlier times illuminated the slopes of two nations bound by blood. Israel stretched across the north, while Judah occupied the south. Previously joined as one during Solomon's era of prosperity, they now existed separately, two routes branching through the passage of time. The calendar marked approximately 870 BCE, when Elijah's account truly commences. Although time moved to a different rhythm in those days, measured by seasons of gathering crops and the succession of rulers instead of by clocks and dated calendars, up north, Israel had relocated its seat of power to Samaria, a settlement upon a hill surrounded by barriers of stone. King Omri had constructed it, and at this point, his offspring Ahab occupied the position of authority. This northern realm overflowed with resources from nature, valleys blessed with rich soil, pathways for commerce bringing merchandise from faraway territories, and settlements where those who worked the land tended plantings that generations before them had established. Toward the south extended Judah, more modest in size yet stable in nature, still governed by descendants of David's bloodline. Jerusalem rose as its most precious jewel, with Solomon's temple capturing dawn's earliest rays each new morning. While monarchs came into power and departed through violence and treachery throughout the north, Judah maintained its unbroken royal succession, a light passed with care from one generation to the next. Flowing between these two nations was not merely the Jordan's waters, but currents of tradition and faith that sometimes blended and at other times collided. The inhabitants spoke the Hebrew tongue, their speech carrying rhythms like desert breezes and ocean tides. They constructed dwellings from stone and bricks formed of mud, providing cool shelter from the sun of Mediterranean regions. Marketplaces hummed with commercial activity. Olives and wheat, vessels of clay and woven fabric, precious metals and aromatic substances. Everyday existence adhered to patterns passed down through ages. Women pulled water up from wells as daylight softened toward evening, their conversations rising in shared dialogue. Men labored in plots of earth inherited across multiple generations. Their hands possessed knowledge of precisely how deep each seed required planting. Young ones absorbed trades practiced by their families, along with narratives and melodies, prayers and customs, all elements of belonging to a nation called apart for special purpose. Still, the world surrounding them was undergoing transformation. Powerful empires emerged beyond their territorial limits. Assyria, positioned to the east, gained might with each passing year, its influence extending farther across territories between great rivers. Egypt, located southward, continued as a slumbering force, still holding on to memories of former greatness. Even nearer, the Phoenician people along the coastline introduced fresh goods, additional prosperity, and unfamiliar deities. These external forces didn't merely deliver trade opportunities. They carried concepts that tested beliefs held since ancient times. During this age when prophets walked the land, Israel found itself standing where paths of belief intersected. The traditional devotion to Yahweh, with its emphasis on fairness, compassion, and sacred agreement, now faced competition from gods who offered promises of moisture for fields, triumph in warfare, abundance, or satisfaction without limitation. Most households continued observing the Sabbath, continued sharing the accounts of Abraham and Moses beside fires in the evening hours. Yet many simultaneously protected themselves by keeping small images of idols hidden away just to be safe. This blending deeply disturbed the prophets, not only Elijah, but additional voices whose identities echo across time. Elisha, Amos, Hosea. Festivals marking harvest times signaled the changing seasons. Passover arrived in springtime when lambs met their end in remembrance of liberation won long ago. Weeks came when the first grain received gathering. Booths arrived when families dwelled in basic structures to remember their journey through wilderness. These patterns maintained time's passage for everyone, connecting what had been to what now existed. Kings possessed authority but shared it among priests, among landowners of wealth, among tribal leaders whose memories stretched back across decades. Villages handled their own matters when able, seeking higher powers only when local understanding proved insufficient. This was an era when dreams still transported messages from the divine, where a person unknown at your entrance might prove to be an angelic being in human form, where the narrow divide between the heavens and the earth appeared crossable for those whose vision could perceive the way forward. This represented the world that formed Elijah, not some far-removed tale of fantasy, but a location of dust particles and morning moisture, of empty stomachs and expectation, of individuals seeking their direction through shifting times while maintaining hold of their authentic identity. Spiritual landscape, the worship of Baal and Asherah. The elevated places of Israel in ancient times contained more than groves of olive trees and trails for shepherds. Upon high ground stood places of sacrifice, some dedicated to Yahweh, the God who had guided them from Egyptian bondage through waters that parted, yet increasingly to alternative powers, offering promises of blessings more readily visible. Foremost among these stood Baal, a name that simply signified Lord or Master. The worship of Baal arrived in successive movements from settlements along the coast, where traders from Phoenicia delivered not merely cloth-dyed purple and timber of cedar, but their deity of storms, who they insisted rode upon clouds of thunder and cleaved the sky with bolts of lightning. For people whose livelihood depended on farming, whose eyes constantly scanned the heavens seeking rain, this god possessed clear attraction. If Baal commanded the tempests, perhaps his blessing would guarantee containers filled to capacity and vegetation flourishing in fields. Across villages throughout the northern realm, small figures fashioned from clay depicting Baal started appearing within homes. His representation showed him youthful and powerful, one arm lifted with a lightning bolt prepared for throwing. Those who served as his priests taught that each summer he experienced death when the territory became parched and brown, then experienced rebirth when rains of winter came again. This pattern of dying and returning to life appeared to align with seasonal cycles that farmers understood intimately. Standing alongside Baal was Asherah, venerated as his companion, or at times as a goddess with her own standing. Her representations were trees or poles, carved from wood positioned beside altars. Some referred to her as the mother goddess, ruler of the sky, source of life. Where Baal delivered rain from the heavens above, Asherah symbolized the fertility of earth below. In combination, they created what seemed a complete cycle of existence in many minds. Worship conducted at these sacred sites differed tremendously from the restrained service at Yahweh's temple. Rituals for Baal involved feasting, dancing, and frequently actions intended to reflect the sacred union of the god and goddess. Music from percussion instruments and flutes filled these assemblies. Wine poured without restraint, and the lines separating worship from celebration grew unclear beneath skies filled with stars. The attraction wasn't merely spiritual in nature, but also utilitarian. Those who served Baal made claims of direct power over weather patterns and agricultural yield. During times when drought persisted, they carried out complex ceremonies, at times inflicting cuts upon themselves so their own blood might stir Baal toward action. These dramatic exhibitions attracted audiences and those who converted. For numerous Israelites, this transformation occurred slowly, nearly imperceptibly. They didn't necessarily turn their backs completely on their ancestral beliefs. They merely incorporated additional gods to address all contingencies. A person working the fields might bring first fruits to Yahweh's altar while maintaining a figure of Baal in a small space at home. A person engaged in commerce might petition Yahweh for dealings conducted honestly, yet wear a charm of Asherah for favorable outcomes. This blending caused great distress for those who recalled the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." The prophets perceived not harmless adoption of cultural practices, but a fundamental act of betrayal against identity. Israel had been brought into being through covenant with a single God, not with many. Their entire reason for existence, to serve as illumination for all nations, was being dimmed by these foreign influences. What intensified the difficulty of resisting this spiritual drift was support from royalty. When King Ahab entered marriage with Jezebel, a princess from Phoenicia, the worship of Baal received official endorsement. No longer merely practice among common folk, it transformed into religion of the state. Temples rose in locations of prominence. Royal resources supported hundreds upon hundreds of priests and prophets committed to these deities. Still, even as devotion to Baal expanded across public areas, quiet households continued passing down older traditions. Grandmothers continued instructing children in the Shema prayer. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Fathers continued marking doorframes with words from the ancient covenant. Not every person bowed before the new gods, even when doing so could have brought advantage in society or politics. This divided heart throughout Israel, pulled between the God who had selected them and gods they possessed freedom to select, generated the tension into which Elijah would enter. His challenge would involve not merely confronting a monarch, but summoning an entire population back from a direction that offered swift benefits, yet led them away from their most profound truth. The rise of Ahab and Jezebel, power, politics, and idolatry. The royal settlement of Samaria rested upon its elevated ground like a crown positioned upon the territory. Walls constructed of white stone captured morning illumination, while inside, the palace of King Ahab filled with bustling motion. Those who served hurried down corridors, offering coolness. Representatives from foreign lands waited in entrance chambers. Guards wearing polished protective armor stood positioned at gates and entryways, representing the king's increasing might. Ahab himself did not match what stories frequently portray him as being. The offspring of Omri, a military leader who seized control of the throne, Ahab inherited a realm acquiring strength. Under his governance, settlements expanded their boundaries. Fresh structures rose from stone foundations. Commercial exchange prospered with bordering territories. By numerous standards of successful kingship, he achieved what others before him could not. His marriage to Jezebel secured an alliance with the prosperous coastal realm of Sidon. This union delivered gold into treasuries belonging to royalty and opened pathways for trade that brought Israel prosperity. Those who worked the fields discovered markets for their wheat. Those who crafted with their hands produced items for purchasers from other lands. An age of prosperity appeared within reach after years filled with struggle. Yet this political pairing carried spiritual ramifications few had anticipated. Jezebel arrived in Samaria not simply as a bride, but as a committed adherent of Baal and Asherah. Her devotion wasn't casual in nature. It formed the foundation of who she understood herself to be. The offspring of a priest who also ruled as king, she believed with intense conviction in her God's authority and entitlement to veneration. Inside the palace walls, alterations began with subtlety initially. A modest shrine made its appearance, then expanded in size. Priests from Phoenicia arrived, their accents from foreign lands soon becoming familiar within royal corridors. Jezebel's power grew with each season that passed, not through supernatural means, but through the regular power of a forceful will combined with royal position. Ahab himself appears to have regarded religion more as an instrument of politics than as personal conviction. When Jezebel requested that temples be erected for Baal, he probably saw benefits from a practical standpoint, bringing pleasure to his wife, fortifying connections with foreign powers, satisfying those among his subjects already attracted to these gods. The traditional faith could maintain its position, yet room would be created for new forms of belief. This approach, rooted in practicality, overlooked something essential. The worship of Yahweh wasn't intended to be a single choice among numerous options, but the very foundation of Israel's complete existence as a people. The covenant established at Sinai had created not merely religious customs, but regulations for justice, concern for those in poverty, and proper relationships among neighbors. When the center experienced a shift, everything else shifted along with it. Before long, Jezebel's passion exceeded her husband's political estimations. Not satisfied with establishing her faith alongside beliefs already present, she commenced actively suppressing those who prophesied for Yahweh. Some faced expulsion from their dwellings. Others retreated into concealment, receiving food secretly from those who maintained loyalty to the traditional ways. A small number paid the highest cost for their unwillingness to compromise. The royal court underwent transformation as well. Counselors who might have offered words of caution discovered themselves replaced by individuals who repeated what the king and queen desired to hear. Ahab, despite all his capability in affairs of governance, became progressively isolated from the pulse of his people. From his palace upon the hilltop, the increasing dissatisfaction throughout villages and farmland remained mostly invisible to his awareness. Meanwhile, Queen Jezebel evolved into a force possessing her own authority. Unlike numerous royal spouses satisfied to oversee household responsibilities, she stepped with boldness into public existence. Her name, which potentially translates to "Where is the Prince?" in reference to Baal, became instead a declaration of power. Here stood the prince, embodied in this woman who declined to remain in obscurity. In combination, Ahab and Jezebel formed a kingdom progressively at war with itself. On the surface, prosperity concealed problems. Lying deeper, fresh structures gleamed, while ancient covenant lay in neglect. Gold from foreign sources flowed inward, while justice trickled away. Religious celebrations grew increasingly lavish, while their significance evaporated. For most ordinary individuals, existence continued along its rhythms. They tended their plots of land, brought up their offspring, and attempted to find their way through the shifting spiritual terrain without attracting unwelcome notice. Many discovered it easier to bow briefly before new altars than to risk standing apart. Survival frequently demanded compromise. Still, some held memories. Some maintained faith with the God who had brought them through sea and desert. Some whispered prayers that had been spoken across generations. And somewhere throughout the hill country of Gilead, a man called Elijah observed, paid attention, and waited for the moment when remaining silent would no longer fulfill purpose. Enter Elijah, the unassuming Tishbite. The mist of morning still clung to Gilead's hills when he initially emerges in our account, not with blasts from a trumpet or royal declaration, but simply as an individual from Tishbe, Elijah. His name in itself a statement, "My God is Yahweh," spoken every time another person called out to him across a field or in a marketplace. How did this prophet who would challenge kings appear? Scripture provides us hints instead of detailed portraits. Later, a different king would identify him by his garment, woven from hair, and his belt made of leather. Simple clothing for an uncomplicated life. His hands probably bore roughness from labor, his skin showed weathering from sun and wind. His eyes, we can imagine, held both tenderness and intensity, the contradiction of one who has looked long upon sacred realities. Tishbe itself held no status as a great city, a modest community east of the Jordan River, where hills rolled onward toward deserts in the distance. Here, distant from royal centers and ports of trade, traditional ways maintained stronger hold. Children continued learning the accounts of Abraham's summons, Jacob's ladder, Moses and the bush that burned. Sabbaths continued, meaning rest, instead of merely reduced commerce. The pattern of life continued adhering to rhythms established by ancestors long since departed. In such locations, one develops the ability to read more than written scrolls. Elijah possessed knowledge of the language spoken by changing skies, of vegetation that signals coming drought or abundance, of creatures that detect danger before humans can name it. This understanding of earth and seasons would serve him well in days ahead, when wilderness transformed into both exile and refuge. We possess no knowledge of his family or how he provided sustenance before prophecy laid claim to him. Did he tend to sheep-watching flocks upon hillsides? Did he work as a farmer, coaxing crops from ground filled with stones? Did he work as a craftsman, giving shape to wood or stone? Scripture maintains these particulars hidden, perhaps as a reminder that God's summons arrives not based upon lineage or occupation, but upon the concealed preparedness within a heart. What distinguished Elijah from others wasn't external magnificence, but internal attentiveness. In an age when many heard solely what they wished to hear, he maintained listening for a voice beyond human noise. While others rushed toward comfort and security, he remained receptive to uncomfortable realities. His strength originated not in physical power, but in this quiet readiness to remain firm when foundations trembled. Those who study history inform us prophets weren't uncommon in Israel of ancient times. Some attached themselves to courts of royalty, presenting counsel that kings desired hearing. Others created communities, engaging in study, prayer, and transmission of wisdom from teacher to pupil. A few wandered in solitude outside established frameworks, possessing freedom to speak without favoritism or fear. Elijah appears to have commenced among this final category, unattached, unannounced, appearing suddenly before both kings and common people alike with messages that sliced through pretense. No school dedicated to prophets claimed him as a student. No political group counted him as an ally. He moved like the wind, present when needed, departed when work reached completion. His entrance in our account arrives at the precise moment when hope appeared darkest. The worship of Baal possessed royal backing. The prophets of Yahweh were dispersed or rendered silent. Ordinary individuals discovered themselves trapped between ancient covenant and fresh pressures. The very identity of Israel hung suspended in the balance. Yet one individual stepping from the shadows of an overlooked town would shift these scales, not through armies or riches or political maneuvering, but through unbreakable certainty in the God whose name he bore. Elijah stood as a living reminder that a solitary voice speaking truth can echo with greater volume than choruses singing comfortable falsehoods. As night approaches and your breathing grows steady, picture this unexpected hero at the threshold of his journey. Not yet the great prophet who would summon fire down. Not the shattered individual who would flee in fear. Not yet the one who listens and would hear God within silence. Simply Elijah of Tishbe, moving toward a destiny he could not yet perceive with clarity. Tomorrow shall trace his initial steps into prophecy. A drought declared. A king confronted, a nation facing consequences long postponed. Yet for this moment, find rest in understanding that even the most significant journeys commence with humble beginnings. And even the most powerful voices initially speak in whispers. The drought, Elijah's first prophecy. Throughout the peaceful hills of Gilead, a modest individual from Tishbe made preparation for the most significant challenge his life would hold. Elijah, a name meaning "My God is Yahweh," stood at the doorway of his summons. The territory had grown removed from its sacred foundations, turning toward false images and forgotten commitments. King Ahab governed from his palace in Samaria, his heart drawn away from truth by Jezebel, his wife from Phoenicia. In combination, they had constructed temples dedicated to Baal across the northern kingdom, guiding the population into worship of storm deities who made promises of rain and harvest, yet delivered nothing beyond rituals devoid of substance. Elijah traveled many days to arrive at the king's palace. Dust collected on his simple garments as he passed through villages where altars dedicated to foreign gods occupied positions once held by those dedicated to the Lord. The prophet's spirit grew weighted with each step forward. Still, his determination never faltered. The guards, serving royalty, observed this stranger with doubt as he came near the throne room. Without formality or announcement, Elijah stepped into view and uttered words that would resound through centuries. "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain during these years except according to my word." No extended speech, no grand declaration, merely a simple pronouncement that would bring a powerful kingdom to its knees. Those present at court responded with laughter. The king dismissed him with a gesture, yet in the heavens clouds commenced scattering and disappearing. That evening, as Elijah found rest beneath the stars, divine guidance came to him. "Depart from this place, turn toward the east, and conceal yourself by the brook called Cherith, which flows into the Jordan." The prophet grasped immediately. Ahab would soon recognize the drought as real, and his anger would prove terrible. At the break of day, Elijah collected his limited possessions and slipped away from Samaria. The journey to Cherith carried him through valleys, already displaying indications of the approaching hardship. Leaves curled along their edges, and the grass that usually grew lush had lost its vibrant coloring. The brook, Cherith, provided shelter between steep banks, where Elijah could stay concealed from eyes that searched. Clear water continued flowing across smooth stones, although the prophet understood this too would soon grow less. He constructed a simple shelter using branches and settled into what would transform into his wilderness sanctuary. Day following day, the drought intensified its hold on the territory. Fields turned from brown to grey. Wells that had provided for villages across generations commenced running dry. In palaces and humble dwellings alike, individuals looked upward, searching for any indication of clouds. Meanwhile, Elijah observed as God fulfilled a different promise. Ravens arrived morning and evening, transporting bread and meat within their beaks. These wild birds, regarded as unclean according to Jewish law, transformed into the servants of divine provision. The prophet drank from the brook and consumed what the birds delivered, sustained by faith throughout the wilderness. As weeks transformed to months, the landscape underwent transformation. Trees released their leaves outside of their season. Farmers slaughtered livestock they possessed no means to feed. The brook that had served as Elijah's source of life diminished day following day until it existed as merely a trickle between stones. King Ahab dispatched riders across the land and beyond, searching for the prophet who had spoken this curse. Yet Elijah remained in safety and concealment, watching and waiting as the drought fulfilled its divine purpose, revealing the powerlessness of Baal, the supposed deity of storms and fertility. When the brook finally dried entirely, Elijah looked upward at the empty sky. His time at Cherith had reached its end. Once more, the word of the Lord arrived. "Rise up, travel to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and remain there. I have given command to a widow in that place to provide for you." With a heart filled with trust, Elijah collected his belongings and departed northward toward a foreign territory where worship of Baal had originated and where an unexpected miracle awaited. Ravens by the brook, a time of solitude. The journey to Cherith had marked Elijah's initial step into a deeper wilderness, not merely of territory, but of soul. As he made himself settled beside the flowing water, the prophet entered a season of deep solitude. Here, removed from the chaos of Ahab's court and the corruption throughout Israel's cities, Elijah discovered space for listening. Mist rose from the brook as each day commenced. Elijah would kneel at the edge of the water, gathering the cool liquid within his hands for drinking and washing. These simple rituals established the rhythm of his days. No temple ceremonies, no marketplaces filled with crowds, merely the quiet companionship of nature and its creator. The ravens arrived with remarkable regularity. Their wings of black would emerge against the sky at dawn, carrying portions of bread and meat. Some who study these matters believe these provisions may have originated from nearby villages, or perhaps from the king's own kitchens. The irony of Ahab unknowingly providing food for the very prophet he sought to destroy. Elijah's shelter developed greater refinement as time passed. What commenced as a simple lianto transformed into a modest hut constructed of branches and leaves. He positioned stones to form a place for fire, though he employed it sparingly to prevent detection. During the night, he would gaze upward through openings in his roof at stars distributed across the vastness of heaven. The silence at Cherith was not empty in nature, but filled with songs from birds, leaves rustling, and the steady murmur of water flowing. Within this natural cathedral, Elijah's prayers grew deeper. No longer distracted by the noise of human activity, he commenced recognizing the subtle ways God speaks through quietness. At times he would walk along the edge of the brook, gathering plants suitable for eating to supplement what the ravens delivered. These slow, intentional movements transformed into a form of meditation while moving. Every berry, every leaf represented divine care during a time of national judgment. As the drought grew more intense, Elijah witnessed its effects upon the wilderness. Animals arrived more frequently to drink at the brook. He observed deer, foxes, and birds beyond counting, relying upon this diminishing source of life. The prophet shared a sanctuary with these fellow creatures, all dependent upon the same source. The changing seasons delivered their own challenges. Summer heat transformed the ground hard as clay. Winter delivered cold nights, when Elijah would wrap himself within his cloak, gathered near embers of his modest fire. Through all weather, the ravens maintained their faithful service. Throughout this time of separation, Elijah's spirit acquired strength, even as the brook acquired weakness. He reflected upon Israel's history, the deliverance from Egypt, the giving of the law, the conquest of Canaan. Each account reinforced his understanding of God's faithfulness across generations. What thoughts occupied Elijah's mind as he watched the brook slowly vanish? Perhaps he pondered the suffering throughout the territory. Perhaps he questioned how long the drought would persist. Yet in the core of his being, the prophet understood this harsh medicine was necessary to turn hearts back toward truth. The wildlife commenced thinning as water grew scarce. Birds no longer sang with the same enthusiasm. Plants withered along the banks. Elijah observed these changes with a heart both weighted and hopeful. Waited for the present suffering, hopeful for the renewal it would eventually deliver. When the final puddles of Cherith dried beneath the sun, Elijah faced a moment of testing. Would fresh directions arrive? Had his mission reached its end before it truly commenced? Standing beside the dusty stream bed, he waited with the patience born from months in solitude. The divine voice, now familiar through extended communion, spoke once more with a fresh assignment. The time had arrived to depart this sanctuary that had nurtured and protected him. The lessons of Cherith, dependence, patience, attentiveness, had made him ready for what lay ahead. With a final glance at the location that had served as his home, Elijah shouldered his limited possessions and turned his face toward Zarephath. The solitude of the brook had shaped him like water shapes stone, gradually, persistently, and with perfect purpose. The widow of Zarephath, miracles in Sidon. The road to Zarephath carried Elijah across borders and boundaries, not merely of territory but of faith. Sidon lay within Phoenician territory, the very heartland of worship dedicated to Baal. How unusual that God would dispatch his prophet to the homeland of Queen Jezebel, whose hatred for Yahweh burned like fire. Dust adhered to Elijah's sandals and robes as he traveled northward. The drought had expanded beyond Israel's borders, affecting even the coastal territories of Phoenicia. Fields that should have displayed green growth in spring instead showed only withered stems and soil cracked open. Zarephath came into view as a cluster of modest buildings positioned near the sea. This was no grand city, but a working town where those who fished and those who practiced crafts earned their living. As Elijah came near the town gate, he noticed a woman collecting sticks, thin, dry branches that had fallen from dying trees. Something in her movements, a certain careful deliberation perhaps, or the dignity maintained despite clear poverty, caught his attention. Divine certainty filled his heart. This was the widow God had promised would provide for him. "Please bring me a small amount of water in a vessel so that I may drink," Elijah called out to her. The request was bold during a time of drought, yet she turned toward her home to fulfill it. As she went, he added, "Please also bring me a piece of bread in your hand." The widow stopped and turned. Her face displayed the strain of extended hardship. "As the Lord your God lives," she responded, "I do not possess bread, only a handful of flour remaining in a bin and a little oil within a jar. I am gathering sticks so that I may prepare a final meal for myself and my son, so that we may eat it and die." Her words held no self-pity, only the quiet acceptance of what appeared inevitable. The drought had taken everything, leaving only sufficient for a final meal before starvation claimed them both. Elijah's response must have appeared impossible. "Do not fear. Go and do as you have said, yet make me a small cake from it first, and afterward make some for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord God of Israel says, the bin of flour shall not be emptied, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain upon the earth." What thoughts passed through the widow's mind as she heard these words? Perhaps she recognized something within this stranger's eyes, a certainty, a compassion that transcended ordinary human kindness. Or perhaps desperate hope made her willing to take an extraordinary risk. She returned to her home, this foreign woman possessing faith, and did precisely as Elijah had instructed. With hands that trembled, she mixed the last of her flour with oil and baked a small cake for the prophet before preparing food for herself and her son. Then arrived the miracle, quiet, domestic, yet deep. The following morning she reached into the flour bin, anticipating emptiness, yet discovered instead a handful waiting. The oil jar, which should have been dry, held sufficient to prepare another day's bread. Day following day, this pattern persisted, never abundant, never overflowing, simply enough for each day's requirements. The flour did not increase, it simply failed to diminish. The oil did not multiply, it simply refused to run dry. In this daily renewal, the widow and her son witnessed divine faithfulness in its most intimate form. Elijah remained with this family, occupying an upper room within their modest home. He transformed into part of their household rhythm. The morning preparation of bread, the careful management of limited resources, the evening conversations as lamplight cast warm shadows upon humble walls. The prophet who had lived in wilderness solitude now experienced a different kind of blessing, community. He shared meals with the widow and her son, listened to their stories, and gradually transformed into not merely a guest, but family. Within this Phoenician home, far from the temple in Jerusalem, genuine worship occurred. As weeks transformed to months, Zarephath itself commenced knowing Elijah. Though he maintained his identity quiet, his presence delivered a sense of peace that extended beyond the widow's home. Throughout a land dedicated to Baal, the God of Israel was silently at work, sustaining life and nurturing faith. The flour and oil continued their daily renewal, a persistent reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, provision arrives for those who trust. Not extravagant wealth, but daily bread, not excess, but enough. This modest miracle sustained 3 lives, while a greater confrontation developed on the horizon. The resurrection of the widow's son, life and death interwoven. Throughout the quiet rhythm of days at Zarephath, tragedy struck without warning. The widow's son, who had survived the early months of drought through the miracle of the flour and oil, fell suddenly into illness. His fever burned hot as desert sand. His breathing grew labored, and his young body weakened hour following hour. The widow tended her son with desperate care. Cool cloths upon his forehead, herbal remedies passed down through generations, whispered prayers to whatever divine power might pay attention. Elijah, too, prayed from his upper room, sensing the battle between life and death unfolding beneath his feet. Despite their efforts, the boy's condition deteriorated. One morning, the prophet woke to the sound of weeping. He descended to discover the widow cradling her son's still body, rocking gently, as mothers have done in grief since time commenced. The miracle of sustained life, through endless flour and oil, now appeared a cruel prelude to deeper loss. Through tears, the widow looked upward at Elijah, with questions carved in her expression. "What have you against me, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son?" Her words revealed ancient beliefs that suffering arrived as punishment for wrongdoing. In her grief, she wondered if the prophet's presence had drawn divine attention to sins she thought forgotten. Had the daily miracle been merely a setup for greater sorrow? Elijah's response was not philosophical debate, but immediate action. "Give me your son," he said, reaching for the lifeless child. The weight of the boy within his arms, the heaviness of death itself, must have been overwhelming as he carried him up the stairs to his own chamber. Within the privacy of his room, Elijah laid the boy upon his bed. Then arrived a prayer unlike any recorded before in Scripture. Not a distant petition, but an urgent cry, born of genuine anguish. "O Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy upon the widow with whom I lodge by killing her son?" 3 times Elijah stretched himself upon the child's body, an act of identification and connection, his warm flesh pressed against cold skin, his breathing strong against lungs that no longer drew air. "O Lord my God," he cried out, "please let this child's soul come back to him." The moments that followed held the silence of ultimate suspense. Then a flutter of eyelids, a small catch of breath, color returning to pale cheeks. The impossible threshold between death and life had been crossed once more, this time in reverse. Elijah gathered the breathing child within his arms and carried him down the stairs. No words could capture the emotion of that moment when he placed the living boy in his mother's embrace. "See," he said simply, "your son lives." The widow's response revealed a journey beyond mere gratitude. "Now, by this I understand that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is the truth. Not merely acknowledgement of a miracle, but recognition of ultimate reality. Not merely acceptance of divine power, but surrender to divine truth." This resurrection in Zarephath marked the first recorded instance in Scripture of someone being raised from death. The significance extended beyond one family's joy. It stood as testimony that the God of Israel held power over life's greatest enemy. While Baal's temple stood empty and powerless during the drought, Yahweh demonstrated authority over both the sustenance of life and its restoration. Throughout the days that followed, the relationship between prophet and widow deepened through shared wonder. The boy who had crossed death's threshold brought fresh energy to their small household. His laughter echoed against walls that had known only worried whispers. His appetite gave fresh meaning to the daily miracle of flour and oil. For Elijah, this resurrection confirmed his calling in deep ways. The God who had sent ravens, preserved a brook, guided him to Zarephath, and maintained flour and oil had now reversed death itself. Each miracle built upon the previous one, forming a foundation of faith for the greater confrontations still to arrive. The story spread through Zarephath in hushed conversations. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, others wondered if their own gods had been at work. Yet those closest to the event recognized something fundamentally different, a power not tied to temples or seasonal cycles, but to relationship and compassion. As the third year of drought commenced weighing upon the land, Elijah sensed a shift within his spirit. The time of hiding and waiting was approaching its end. The lessons of Cherith and Zarephath, God's provision, power, and personal care, had prepared him for the public confrontation that would define his prophetic ministry. Return to Israel, preparing for a showdown. 3 years had passed since Elijah pronounced drought upon the land. 3 years of hidden brooks, faithful ravens, miraculous flour, and a child returned from death. During this time, Israel had descended further into suffering and confusion. The people wavered between gods, uncertain where to place their trust as crops failed and hunger expanded. The word of the Lord came to Elijah in Zarephath with clarity and purpose. Go, present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. The time for seclusion had ended. The prophet had been preserved for this moment of public confrontation and divine demonstration. Saying goodbye to the widow and her son proved difficult. They had transformed into family to him, witnesses to his humanity as well as his calling. With promises to return when possible, Elijah blessed their home one final time. The flour bin and oil jar would continue their daily renewal until rain restored the natural order. The journey southward carried Elijah through a landscape transformed by drought. Valleys once fertile had transformed into dust bowls where nothing grew. Villages stood half abandoned as families had scattered in search of water and food. The prophet walked through this desolation with steady purpose, understanding that renewal waited on the other side of confrontation. As he crossed into Israel's territory, Elijah encountered evidence of Ahab's desperate search for remaining water sources. Royal guards patrolled known springs, rationing access and maintaining order among thirsty citizens. The king's servants requisitioned available food for the palace, while common people grew thin with hunger. Reports reached Elijah about Jezebel's response to the crisis. Rather than questioning her faith in Baal, she had intensified it, slaughtering prophets of Yahweh in rage against their God. Only a handful had survived, hidden within caves by courageous believers who risked their lives to bring them food and water. Among those still serving within the royal court was Obadiah, the king's steward, who secretly maintained faith in the true God. Despite his position, he had used his influence to protect 100 prophets, concealing them within caves and providing bread and water at great personal risk. Divine timing brought Elijah and Obadiah together on a road outside Samaria. The steward had been sent by Ahab to search for grazing land for the remaining royal livestock. When he recognized the prophet, Obadiah fell to his knees in reverence and fear. "Is that you, my lord Elijah?" he asked, scarcely believing his eyes. The prophet whom the king had sought throughout every nation and kingdom now stood before him upon an open road. It appeared impossible, perhaps even a trap. When Elijah instructed him to announce his return to Ahab, Obadiah hesitated. "As soon as I depart from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you away somewhere I do not know," he protested. "And so, when I go and inform Ahab and he's unable to locate you, he's going to take my life." The steward's terror made clear just how perilous the circumstances had grown. Even those in high positions could forfeit their existence to the fury of a king. Elijah gave him reassurance through a solemn vow. "As surely as the Lord of hosts is alive, the one before whom I serve, I will without question show myself to Ahab this very day." Armed with this promise, Obadiah rushed off to locate his monarch. In the meantime, Elijah made spiritual preparations for the confrontation that lay ahead. This wouldn't simply be an encounter between a prophet and a ruler, but rather a pivotal moment for the spiritual destiny of Israel. Upon learning of Elijah's presence, Ahab personally rode out to confront him. 3 full years of pursuit, 3 years of governing a drought-ravaged nation had not mellowed the king's disposition, but instead had made it even harder. The way he greeted Elijah revealed everything about his viewpoint. "So it's you, is it, you troublemaker of Israel?" Standing before royal authority, Elijah remained completely unshaken, possessing the certainty of someone fully aware of his divine mission. Without hesitation, he replied, "Not at all. I haven't brought trouble to Israel. Rather, you and the house of your father have, in that you've abandoned the Lord's commandments and gone after the Baals." Right there in that moment, standing on dusty terrain, with the king's attendants looking on, Elijah issued his proposition, a plan for the most dramatic public display of heavenly power imaginable. "Send out word and assemble the entire nation of Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets who serve Baal, and also the 400 prophets devoted to Asherah who dine at Jezebel's table." The suggestion was incredibly audacious. A single prophet of Yahweh standing against 850 prophets representing false deities, with the whole nation watching as witnesses. This wouldn't be some private miracle like the multiplication of flour and oil, or even the bringing back to life of the widow's child. This would be a public test, with the restoration of the entire nation hanging in the outcome. To the astonishment of everyone present, Ahab gave his consent. Perhaps it was curiosity that motivated him, or perhaps desperation for the rain he'd been promised. Perhaps some divine influence moved his heart in spite of his own intentions. Whatever his reasoning might have been, messengers were sent out across the length and breadth of Israel, calling the people to gather at Mount Carmel for what would prove to be the most spectacular spiritual confrontation their nation had ever witnessed. As the preparations got underway, Elijah withdrew into prayer. The wisdom gained from Cherith's isolation and from the household in Zarephath would now equip him for this mountain of decision. Everything that had transpired before this point, the provision through ravens, the drying brook, the widow's remarkable faith, the child brought back from death, all of it had been preparation for this defining hour when Israel would be forced at last to make a choice between competing gods. The challenge issued to Ahab, a summons to gather. Following 3 long years without rain, the territory of Israel lay parched beyond measure and desperately hungry. Gardens that had once flourished with abundant life now lay cracked open beneath the unforgiving sun. Fields that previously yielded grain now stood completely barren and desolate. The population grew increasingly desperate, their inner spirits just as dry as the soil under their feet. It was at this time that the voice of God came to Elijah, declaring, "Go now, show yourself before Ahab, and I shall send rainfall upon the earth." Though danger most certainly awaited him there, Elijah set out with unwavering steps in the direction of Samaria, the royal capital where King Ahab maintained his throne. The famine gripped the territory with such severity that even Ahab himself, along with his household steward Obadiah, searched for any grass they could find to keep the surviving horses and mules alive. As divine providence orchestrated events, Obadiah happened upon Elijah along the road. This encounter was no mere coincidence, but rather heaven's perfect timing. "Can it really be you, my lord Elijah?" Obadiah questioned, bowing himself low all the way to the earth. His words trembled with a mixture of both reverence and terror. You see, Obadiah privately revered the Lord, having concealed a full 100 prophets inside caves during the time when Jezebel conducted her purge. Elijah addressed him with serene authority. "Yes, it is I. Go now and inform your master that Elijah has arrived." Obadiah paused, giving voice to his anxiety. "When I deliver this message to Ahab and he's unable to locate you, he will end my life." The steward knew all too well about the king's unrelenting pursuit of Elijah across neighboring territories and kingdoms. Yet Elijah gave him assurance. "As certainly as the Lord of hosts is living, the one in whose presence I stand, I will definitely present myself before Ahab this day." His words bore not the slightest trace of uncertainty, only peaceful confidence. Upon receiving the message, Ahab hastened to meet Elijah. Their meeting crackled with palpable tension as the monarch spit out his charge. "So it's you. Is it you who have brought disaster upon Israel?" Elijah remained completely unmoved in the face of the king's royal rage. With calm determination, he redirected the accusations squarely back upon the king. "I have brought no disaster to Israel. Rather, you have, through abandoning the Lord's commandments and pursuing the Baals." Then came the challenge, spoken not as a mere taunt, but rather as a call to witness the truth. "Now then, send word and gather the whole of Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets devoted to Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who feast at Jezebel's table." Ahab, perhaps motivated by curiosity, perhaps by confidence in the power of his gods, gave his agreement. Messengers fanned out across the territory, summoning people from every village and town to come and witness an extraordinary contest. The question that hung suspended in the balance: who truly commanded the heavens? The ancient deity of their forefathers, or the popular Baal, worshipped by their neighbors? As the people commenced their journeys in the direction of Mount Carmel, the atmosphere itself seemed to pause and hold its breath. Families gathered small bundles of provisions, though precious little remained stored away in their houses. The elderly supported themselves on walking staffs as they joined the pilgrimage. Children questioned their mothers and fathers about where they were headed and for what purpose. To witness which God will provide an answer, came the response. Throughout the night, innumerable campfires dotted the pathways leading toward Carmel. During daylight hours, clouds of dust rose up from the feet of countless travelers. The mountain stood in silence, waiting as destiny made its way toward its slopes. The prophets, devoted to Baal, servants of powerless deities, the light of morning illuminated Mount Carmel as the multitude came together. The crowd formed itself into a vast circle, their expressions marked by both curiosity and anticipation. Standing to one side were the prophets devoted to Baal, dressed in expensive vestments decorated with symbols representing their storm deity. Their ornaments caught and reflected the sunlight as they moved about. They arrived with assurance, having enjoyed the favor of royalty for many years. Elijah stood by himself, his plain garment fashioned from camel's hair and bound with a leather belt, distinguishing him clearly from the elaborately dressed priests standing in opposition. Yet something about his solitary presence demanded attention. His gaze reflected not terror, but rather patient certainty. He moved to the center of the assembly and raised his voice so everyone present could hear. "How much longer will you waver back and forth between two conflicting opinions? If the Lord is truly God, then follow him, but if Baal is, then follow him instead." Silence greeted his words. The crowd shifted about uncomfortably, unwilling to commit themselves. They had spent years with hearts divided, giving honor to Baal in public while privately remembering the God of their forefathers. Now, confronted with an actual choice, they maintained their silence. Elijah went on, laying out the terms of the contest with straightforward clarity. Yes, I alone remain as a prophet of the Lord. But the prophets of Baal number 450 men. Let 2 bulls be provided for us. Allow them to select 1 bull, cut it into pieces, and arrange it on the wood, but place no fire beneath it. I will prepare the 2nd bull and lay it upon wood, also placing no fire beneath it. Then you call upon the name of your God, while I will call upon the name of the Lord. Whichever God responds by sending fire, he is the true God. The straightforwardness of the test appealed to the assembled crowd. "That is well said," they agreed, expressing their approval with nods. The conditions seemed entirely fair. The result would be unmistakable. The prophets devoted to Baal selected their bull, prepared it with care, and positioned it upon their altar. From the morning hours continuing until noon, they called out repeatedly, "Baal, provide us an answer." Their voices began with confidence, but grew progressively more desperate as the hours passed by without any response whatsoever. They performed elaborate dances around the altar, their movements growing increasingly frantic as time continued to wear on. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating relentlessly down upon their faces streaked with sweat. Still, nothing whatsoever occurred. No voice answered, no fire appeared, no indication of divine attention came forth. When midday arrived, Elijah started to mock them in a gentle manner. Call out with louder voices, since he is supposedly a god. Perhaps he's lost deep in thought, or occupied with business, or traveling somewhere. Maybe he's asleep and needs to be roused. His words carried no hatred, just the calm assurance of someone who already knew what the outcome would be. The prophets devoted to Baal responded with even greater frenzy. They slashed themselves with swords and spears, following their customary practices until blood ran freely. Their shouting grew louder as the shadows of afternoon stretched out across the mountainside. They entered into ecstatic trances, continuing until the hour for the evening sacrifice arrived. Still, nothing at all happened. No fire descended. No voice made itself heard. The altar remained nothing more than wood and flesh beneath the uncaring sky. The crowd observed this spectacle with increasing disillusionment. Some who had arrived believing in Baal's strength now whispered expressions of doubt to those standing nearby. Children who had initially been frightened by the wild display now simply appeared bored. Even the most devoted followers of Baal exchanged nervous glances with one another as their prophets' voices grew hoarse from all the shouting. As the shadows lengthened further, exhaustion overtook the prophets of Baal. Their movements slowed considerably. Their voices began to falter and fail. The multitude sensed the transformation from confidence into desperation. What had started as a show of power had devolved into a painful exhibition of helplessness. In the silence that at last descended, every eye turned toward Elijah. The moment had arrived for the prophet of the Lord to take his turn. Elijah's altar, a prayer requesting fire. As the evening drew near, Elijah summoned the people to gather close around him. "Come nearer to me," he invited, his tone gentle yet carrying clearly to those standing farthest away. The crowd pressed in closer, drawn by his composed demeanor after witnessing the frantic display that had consumed the entire day. With purposeful movements, Elijah commenced rebuilding an old altar that had deteriorated into disrepair. He selected 12 stones, a single one for each tribe of Israel, calling to mind their unified heritage before the kingdom had divided into two. His hands moved with intention, positioning each stone with careful reverence. Surrounding the altar, he dug a trench with sufficient width to contain 2 measures of seed. The crowd looked on in curious silence, wondering about this extra preparation. Unlike the complex rituals performed by Baal's prophets, Elijah worked with straightforward, unhurried motions. He arranged the wood with care, sectioned the bull into pieces, and positioned it upon the wood. Then came the surprising command: fill 4 jars completely with water and pour it over the offering and over the wood. Eyebrows lifted among those watching. Water was extremely precious, following 3 years without rain. Yet Elijah instructed that it be poured directly onto the very materials intended to burn. The assistants carried out his instructions, watching as the water soaked thoroughly into both the sacrifice and the wood. "Do it once more, a second time," Elijah directed. Once again, water cascaded down over the altar. "Do it yet a 3rd time," he stated, his expression remaining serene. By this point, water had filled the trench surrounding the altar completely. The wood was saturated all the way through. The meat glistened, completely covered with moisture. Any ordinary fire would find it utterly impossible to ignite such thoroughly drenched materials. The crowd whispered amongst themselves. Some wondered whether the prophet had lost his senses. Others questioned if this might be some kind of trick. But everyone watched with intensity, sensing that something of great significance was approaching. As the hour for the evening sacrifice came, Elijah stepped forward. No dancing, no shouting, no wounds inflicted upon himself marked his approach to the divine. Instead, he simply prayed, his voice carrying with clarity across the hushed mountainside. "O Lord, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Israel, let it become known on this day that you are God in Israel, and that I serve as your servant." and that I have done all of these things according to your word. Provide me an answer, O Lord. Answer me, so that this people may understand that you, O Lord, are the true God, and that you are turning their hearts back to you. The prayer lasted no more than 30 seconds. Direct, brief, honest, no performance whatsoever. Simply connection. In the heartbeat of silence that came next, the heavens opened up. Fire descended from above. Not gentle flames, but consuming, brilliant light. It burned up the offering, the wood, the stones, even the dust itself. It licked up every bit of the water that had filled the trench. The mountain itself appeared to tremble before this display of heavenly power. The people fell prostrate on their faces before this undeniable sign. The Lord, He alone, is God. The Lord, He alone is God. Their voices joined together in acknowledgement, the sound rolling across the mountainside like the rumbling of thunder. In that instant, hearts that had been divided for so long discovered clarity. The fire had not only consumed the sacrifice, but had burned away all confusion and compromise. The truth stood revealed in flames far too brilliant to question or deny. Elijah's face, illuminated by the divine fire, registered no surprise, just quiet vindication and perhaps a hint of sadness for what would need to come next. The fire descending from heaven, an unmistakable sign. The fire that descended from the heavens changed everything in an instant. Within mere moments, what had seemed impossible became absolutely undeniable. The saturated altar completely consumed. The water evaporated. The stones themselves scorched. Nothing whatsoever remained except ash and wonder. The people stayed prostrate, their foreheads pressed against the earth in both reverence and fear. Some wept without restraint, overwhelmed by the demonstration of power and by the realization of just how far they had wandered astray. Others whispered prayers, rediscovering words they had long forgotten. Elijah allowed them this moment of recognition before he spoke once more. When he did speak, his voice bore the weight of divine judgment. Seize the prophets devoted to Baal. Do not allow even one of them to get away. The crowd, so recently convinced of Baal's worthlessness and the Lord's reality, obeyed without the slightest hesitation. The same prophets who had danced with such confidence just hours earlier now found themselves surrounded, their expensive robes offering them no protection whatsoever against the grasping hands. Elijah led them down toward the brook Kishon, a seasonal stream located at the base of Mount Carmel. There, in accordance with the law given through Moses concerning false prophets who led Israel into error, they met their end. The water ran red as justice was carried out. Harsh when measured by modern standards, certainly, but consistent with the covenant penalties that Israel had accepted. As this solemn task reached its conclusion, Elijah turned his attention to King Ahab, who had observed the entire contest in stunned silence. "Go up now, eat and drink, for there is the sound of an abundance of rain approaching." Though not a single cloud had yet made its appearance, Elijah spoke with absolute certainty. While Ahab departed to take some refreshment, Elijah climbed higher up Mount Carmel in search of solitude for prayer. At the summit, he bent himself down, placing his head between his knees in intense, humble supplication. This posture revealed another dimension of the prophet, not merely the bold challenger, but also the earnest intercessor. He sent his servant to look in the direction of the sea. "Go up now and look toward the sea," he instructed. The servant went, observed the horizon carefully, and returned. "There is nothing visible," he reported. "Go once more," Elijah instructed. 7 times in total, he dispatched his servant, demonstrating persistence in prayer, even following the dramatic answer through fire. 6 times the servant came back with the identical report, nothing at all. On the 7th journey, everything shifted. "Look, a small cloud no larger than a man's hand is rising up from the sea," the servant reported, his voice quickening with excitement. Elijah grasped immediately the significance of this tiny sign. "Go up quickly. Tell Ahab to prepare his chariot and descend now, or else the rain will prevent him from traveling." Within a matter of minutes, the sky grew dark with clouds. Winds swept across the mountaintop, bending trees and whipping at people's garments. The small cloud had multiplied into a storm front, advancing with speed from the Mediterranean. The people still lingering on the mountainside looked upward in amazement. Many among them had never witnessed rain in their entire adult lives, the drought having persisted for so long. Children pointed with excitement at the darkening sky, asking questions their parents could scarcely answer through tears of relief. King Ahab hurried toward his chariot as the first heavy drops commenced falling. The parched earth received them with what seemed almost like audible gratitude, dust transforming instantly into mud. The aroma of rain falling on parched ground rose up like nature's own incense. As the torrent began to pour down, Elijah, empowered by the Lord, gathered up his robes and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel. His feet seemed barely to make contact with the ground as he sprinted through the downpour, an unmistakable sign to everyone who witnessed it that divine power accompanied this humble prophet. The rain continued falling throughout the night, soaking deeply into the cracked soil. Streams that had been dry for years began to flow once more. Cisterns and reservoirs commenced filling up. The land drank deeply following its prolonged thirst. In dwellings across Israel, families assembled by doorways and windows, watching the rainfall with wonder and thanksgiving. Many recalled the prayers they had lifted up during the years of drought. Now, those prayers discovered their answer in the steady rhythm of water descending from heaven. The ending of the drought, rain accompanied by repentance and redemption. The rain fell for days on end, gentle and steady in its pattern. Not the destructive torrents that trigger flash flooding, but rather the nurturing kind that penetrates deeply into the soil. Israel drank in the moisture like a person who has been revived after nearly perishing from thirst. Farmers ventured out into fields they had long abandoned, testing the soil between their fingers with cautious hope beginning to stir. Women brought out containers to capture rainwater, their eyes shining bright with the promise of clean washing and cooking once again. Children splashed about in puddles, experiencing for the very first time the simple delight of playing in rain. In villages scattered across the territory, people assembled to share accounts of the contest that had taken place on Mount Carmel. Those who had witnessed it personally spoke with reverence about the fire descending from heaven. Those hearing the account secondhand listened with eyes wide open, asking questions about every single detail. The story spread outward like ripples expanding across water, reaching even the most isolated settlements. Many households removed their Baal idols from their homes, burying them or smashing them into pieces. Neglected altars dedicated to the Lord were cleared of weeds and reconstructed. Elders who still remembered the ancient ways of worship taught the younger generations the prayers and rituals of their ancestors that had been forgotten. Yet within the palace at Jezreel, darkness was gathering. When King Ahab related to Queen Jezebel everything that Elijah had accomplished, the contest, the fire from heaven, the execution of her prophets, her expression hardened with fury. She dispatched a messenger to Elijah, bearing a chilling oath. "So may the gods deal with me, and even more severely, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." The message reached Elijah as he was resting, perhaps already anticipating the queen's reaction. This threat, coming from the most powerful woman in the entire kingdom, struck fear even in the heart of the prophet who had called fire down from heaven. The scriptures honestly record that he experienced fear, and he got up and ran for his life. This human moment serves to remind us that even the greatest spiritual champions go through fear and doubt. Following tremendous victory often comes a period of vulnerability. Elijah had stood alone in opposition to hundreds, yet now he fled from the threat of a single woman. As Elijah departed in a southward direction toward the wilderness, the land carried on with its healing. Fresh green shoots pushed their way up through soil in fields that had been barren for years. Small flowers made their appearance on hillsides. Farmers began preparing seeds for planting, seeds they had carefully preserved throughout the years of drought. In streams and wadis, water flowed once more. Fish returned to pools where they had disappeared years earlier. Birds gathered at the water's edges, their songs contributing to the atmosphere of renewal. The ecosystem, damaged so severely by years without moisture, commenced its slow recovery. The drought had fulfilled its purpose, calling a wayward people back to their God through hardship when prosperity had led them far astray. Now the blessing of rain functioned as both reward for their return and invitation to continue along the journey of faithfulness. Scattered across Israel, families who had lost members to starvation during the drought conducted memorial services, finally able to grieve properly now that survival was no longer their sole focus. The rain brought not only physical relief but emotional healing as well, washing away years of pain that had accumulated. Some scholars sought out copies of the Torah scrolls, dust-covered and neglected during the years devoted to Baal worship. They read once more the promises and warnings delivered through Moses centuries earlier. Blessings attached to faithfulness, consequences attached to turning away. The recent events had demonstrated these ancient words to be true. In markets reopening after years marked by scarcity, people exchanged not just goods, but stories as well. Where were you when the fire fell became a common question among them. What did you experience when the rain began? Many described experiencing a sense of shame followed by gratitude. Shame for having doubted the God of their forefathers. Gratitude for second chances being offered. Meanwhile, Elijah journeyed toward his own personal wilderness, unaware that his greatest spiritual lessons still lay ahead of him. The contest at Carmel had been spectacular, true enough, but God's next revelation would arrive in a very different form, not in fire or storm, but rather in a gentle whisper. As stars made their appearance over a land drinking deeply of rain so long awaited, the people of Israel slept more peacefully than they had in many years. The drought had come to an end. The rain of renewal had arrived. And though challenges still remained, hope had been restored to a land that had been so thirsty. Jezebel's wrath, the vow of vengeance from a queen. Ahab hurried back toward his palace in Jezreel as the storm clouds were gathering, his royal garments still damp from the downpour that had brought an end to the drought. He discovered Queen Jezebel waiting for him. Her eyes narrowed as he related to her everything that had happened. The contest on Mount Carmel, the unsuccessful prayers offered by her prophets, the fire descending from heaven, and how Elijah had led the people in executing all 450 prophets devoted to Baal. The queen's rage intensified with each word he spoke. Her breathing became more rapid, her jeweled fingers gripping tightly the armrests of her chair. Jezebel had imported the worship of Baal from her native homeland of Sidon. These were her prophets, her priests, her gods that had been humiliated. This represented more than just a religious defeat. It was a personal insult. In the soft glow cast by oil lamps, she summoned a messenger. The man knelt before her with his head bowed low. "Go to Elijah," she commanded, her voice low and controlled. "Inform him that by this time tomorrow I take an oath by the gods that I will make his life like the lives of those he has killed. Let him understand that Jezebel neither forgets nor forgives." Night had descended across Israel. Stars peeked through the clearing skies, bearing witness to the queen's oath. The messenger traveled through the darkness, searching for the prophet who had just achieved his greatest victory. He located Elijah still in the vicinity of Jezreel, perhaps taking rest after his triumph, perhaps waiting to see how the king would respond. But the prophet's expression changed as he heard the message from the queen. This was not how the story was meant to continue. Fire from heaven had fallen down. The rain had returned to the land. The people had proclaimed that the Lord was indeed God. Yet the queen remained unmoved. Her power remained unbroken. Her determination had only been strengthened. Fear, entered into Elijah's heart. Not some small worry, but rather a deep, consuming dread. This man who had faced down hundreds of false prophets, who had called fire down from heaven, who had outrun the chariot of the king, now trembled at the words spoken by one determined woman. Perhaps he had held hope for complete victory, for Ahab's repentance, for Jezebel's downfall. Instead, he discovered himself still being hunted, still under threat. Sometimes our greatest challenges arrive not in our weakest moments, but rather immediately following our greatest triumphs. So it was with Elijah, who had moved from the heights of prophetic power to the depths of human fear in less than a single day. As the night wrapped itself around him like a cloak, Elijah made his decision. He would flee, not toward his mission but away from it, not with faith but with fear driving him. The prophet who had stood fearlessly before kings now fled before the threat issued by a queen. His sandaled feet carried him southward, away from Jezreel, away from Jezebel, away from the land where he had just witnessed the mighty power of God. Sometimes, even the strongest among us need to retreat. Sometimes even the most faithful need time to remember what they truly believe. Elijah's flight was not the conclusion of his story, but rather the commencement of a deeper journey, one that would lead him through despair and into a more intimate connection with the God he served. As stars wheeled overhead in the night sky, Elijah ran on, his shadow stretching out behind him in the moonlight. God watched as his prophet fled, yet did not abandon him. The journey that lay ahead would test Elijah in ways that fire from heaven never could. Elijah's flight, entering the desert of despair. Elijah's feet bore him southward, beyond the boundaries of the northern kingdom. He passed through Judah, the sister kingdom, still remaining faithful to David's line. But even there, he did not experience safety from Jezebel's reach. Her family maintained marriage ties to Judah's royal household. Nowhere seemed safe enough. So he pressed on southward into Beersheba at the very edge of settled territories. There, in this border town, Elijah parted ways with his servant. The journey that lay ahead would be solitary, a path he needed to walk by himself. We all face wilderness moments in our lives when companions are unable to follow, when the path ahead must be walked in complete solitude. From Beersheba, Elijah pushed onward into the Negev desert. A single day's journey he walked until his legs would carry him no farther. The sun beat relentlessly down, a different kind of fire than the one he had summoned from heaven. This heat did not confirm God's presence. It simply drained away Elijah's remaining strength. Under a solitary broom tree, the prophet at last collapsed. This small desert bush offered limited shade, but it was sufficient for Elijah to rest his weary body. His water skin nearly depleted, his food completely gone, his strength totally spent, Elijah looked upward through the sparse branches toward the harsh blue sky. "It is enough now, O Lord," he whispered, his voice cracking from intense thirst. "Take away my life, for I am no better than those who came before me." The words fell from his lips like stones dropping. The mighty prophet who had raised someone from the dead, brought fire down from heaven, and ended a prolonged drought, now pleaded for death in the desert. How swiftly triumph can transform into despair. How easily confidence can crumble into doubt. Elijah had measured himself and discovered his courage to be lacking. He had run rather than taking a stand. He had fled rather than fighting. And now, in his own eyes, he deserved nothing except to die forgotten beneath a desert shrub. Sleep came to him then, the heavy sleep that comes from complete exhaustion. His dreams were empty, his body lay still. The desert wind played with his hair and beard as he slept, the same wind that had once carried the sound of heavy rainfall. Now it carried nothing but heat and dust. But Elijah was not alone in that wilderness. Eyes kept watch over him as he slept. The God who had provided an answer by fire had not abandoned his prophet in the desert. Divine help often arrives when we have reached the absolute end of our own strength, when we have nothing whatsoever left to give. A touch awakened Elijah. He opened his eyes to discover a figure beside him, not threatening in nature but gentle. "Get up and eat," the messenger stated, pointing to a small loaf of bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water positioned by his head. Where they had appeared from, how they had been prepared in this desolate place, these questions did not matter to the hungry prophet. Elijah ate and drank, the simple meal tasting superior to any feast served in a royal palace. Then, with strength partially restored, he lay down once more. The desert day continued its scorching path across the sky. Elijah slept again, his body still recovering from fear, flight, and fatigue. A second time the touch came. A second time the voice spoke, "Get up and eat, for the journey is far too great for you." Elijah's eyes opened to discover the bread and water replenished. This was no ordinary meal. This was food with a purpose, sustenance with a promise. Elijah ate and drank deeply. As the water passed his lips and the bread filled his stomach, strength flowed back into his limbs. Not just ordinary strength, but rather a deep, lasting energy that would carry him far beyond normal human endurance. Rising to his feet, Elijah felt the food working inside him. The messenger had departed, but the message remained clear. There was a journey lying ahead, one far too great for human strength alone. Divine provision had been given for a divine purpose. Turning farther toward the south, Elijah commenced walking once more, his stride strengthening with each step. Days went by, yet he did not experience hunger. Nights arrived, yet he did not tire beyond the point of recovery. For 40 days and 40 nights he traveled, the same duration that Moses had spent on the mountain receiving God's law. His destination was clear now, drawn as if by an invisible thread. He was traveling toward Horeb, the mountain of God, the place where Moses had received the covenant. There, perhaps, he would discover answers. There, perhaps, he would reconnect with the God whose cause appeared lost in Israel. The desert, which had first been his place of despair, became transformed into the path toward revelation. Sometimes our lowest points become corridors, leading toward our deepest insights. What begins as an escape can transform itself into a pilgrimage. So it was for Elijah as his feet carried him ever closer toward the holy mountain. The broom tree, exhaustion, and the visit from an angel. The broom tree that had provided shelter for Elijah stood by itself in the desert, its scraggly branches reaching upward like hands lifted in supplication. This humble bush, offering thin shade in a barren land, became transformed into a sacred space, a sanctuary where heaven made contact with earth, where divine care met human need. Many search for God in temples and in palaces, but sometimes he reveals himself in the most humble of settings, a stable in Bethlehem, a well in Samaria, a bush in the desert. The broom tree moment serves to remind us that God's presence isn't limited to grand structures or formal acts of worship. He locates us where we are, even when where we are happens to be a place of retreat. Elijah's deep sleep beneath those branches wasn't merely physical rest, it was surrender, a letting go. His body and spirit had reached their absolute limits. No strategies remained in place. No plans formed themselves in his mind. Only exhaustion, raw and complete. Yet this very emptiness created the space for divine intervention. The angel's touch was gentle in nature. No thunderclap or blast of trumpets announced the heavenly visitor. Just a quiet presence, a soft touch, a simple instruction: get up and eat. God often speaks not in dramatic declarations, but rather in practical guidance for the next step forward. The bread and water, simple provisions, bore symbolic weight. They represented God's sustaining grace, his attention to basic needs before offering spiritual revelations. When Elijah ate the first time, he satisfied his immediate hunger. But when the angel awakened him again with the same gentle touch, the message deepened: "The journey is far too great for you." These words acknowledged what Elijah already understood. His task exceeded the capacity of human strength. The second meal wasn't merely nourishment, it was empowerment. The food's supernatural quality became evident as Elijah traveled for 40 days on its strength alone. This wasn't merely caloric energy, but rather divine sustenance. The number 40 echoes repeatedly throughout the scriptures. 40 days of rain in the time of Noah, 40 years spent in the wilderness for Israel, 40 days of temptation faced by Jesus. It marks periods characterized by testing, transformation, and transition. What thoughts occupied Elijah's mind during those 40 days of walking? Perhaps memories of victories now seeming hollow, perhaps questions about God's plan for Israel's future, perhaps simply the rhythm of feet upon sand, the whisper of wind, the silent companionship of a God who had not abandoned him despite his flight. The desert itself became transformed into Elijah's teacher. Its harsh landscape stripped away all distractions. Its silence extended an invitation to reflection. Its vastness placed problems into proper perspective. Sometimes God leads us into desert places, not to punish us, but rather to speak to us without any competition from other voices. With each day that passed, Elijah moved farther from Jezebel's threat, but closer toward God's presence. His physical journey mirrored an inner pilgrimage, from fear moving toward faith, from despair moving toward hope, from flight moving toward purpose. The broom tree had marked the turning point, the moment when retreat commenced its transformation into return. As he drew near to Mount Horeb, Elijah was no longer the same man who had collapsed in despair. The desert had changed him. The provision from the angel had sustained him. The solitude had prepared him. He was ready now for what awaited him at the mountain of God. Not with the brash confidence displayed at Mount Carmel, but rather with the quiet readiness of one who had faced his own limitations and discovered God faithful still. The still small voice. Revelation on Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb rose upward from the desert floor, ancient and imposing in its presence. This was the mountain of God, where Moses had received the law, where a bush had burned without being consumed. Now Elijah approached its rugged slopes, his beard grown longer, his skin darkened by 40 days beneath the sun. He discovered a cave on the mountainside and made it his temporary dwelling. The cool darkness welcomed him following weeks spent under open sky. Here, surrounded by walls of stone, Elijah waited. For what exactly? He wasn't entirely certain. Direction, perhaps? Reassurance? Maybe? Or simply rest before whatever was to come next. The word of the Lord located him there. What are you doing here, Elijah? Not an accusation, but rather an invitation to pour out his heart. God often asks questions not to gain information he doesn't possess, but rather to give us the opportunity to articulate our deepest thoughts. Elijah's answer poured forth, the words he had likely rehearsed during his desert journey. I have been extremely zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. The people of Israel have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. Yes, I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away. His complaint contained partial truths, wrapped up in self-pity. Yes, Israel had wandered astray. Yes, prophets had been killed. Yes, his life faced threat. But was he truly alone? Was the situation as hopeless as he was painting it? Sometimes our darkest moments distort our perspective. Go out, came the divine instruction, and take your stand on the mountain before the Lord. Elijah obeyed, moving from the cave's shelter to the exposed mountainside. There the drama commenced unfolding. A great wind tore into the mountain, so powerful it split rocks apart and scattered stones. Elijah braced himself against its force. Surely this was God's presence, this display of raw power. But the text informs us that the Lord was not in the wind. The wind subsided, giving way to an earthquake. The ground beneath Elijah trembled and shook. Rocks tumbled down the slopes. Dust rose up in clouds. Again, Elijah might have expected God's voice to speak through this awesome display. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. Following the earthquake, fire swept across the mountainside. Flames licked at the scrubby vegetation. Heat waves distorted the air. Fire similar to what had consumed Elijah's sacrifice on Mount Carmel. Yet the Lord was not in the fire. Wind, earthquake, fire, all powerful forces, all potential carriers of divine presence, yet all passed by without God speaking through them. Then came something unexpected, a gentle whisper. Some translations refer to it as a still, small voice, or the sound of sheer silence. After the chaos created by natural forces, this quiet sound drew Elijah's attention like nothing else could possibly do. Covering his face with his cloak, a gesture of reverence in God's presence, Elijah stepped toward the cave entrance. Now the question came once more. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The same words, but perhaps heard differently, following the mountain's lesson in divine communication. Elijah repeated his complaint, word for word. Sometimes our grievances are felt so deeply that even divine encounters don't immediately shift our perspective. God listened patiently to the repeated lament, then responded not with rebuke, but rather with direction. "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus," God instructed. Specific tasks followed. Anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Anoint Jehu as king over Israel. Anoint Elisha as prophet to succeed you. Each appointment represented a part of God's ongoing work that would continue with or without Elijah's participation. Then came the gentle correction to Elijah's perspective. "Yet I will leave 7,000 inches Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." The prophet was not alone. God had preserved a faithful remnant, though hidden from Elijah's sight. The revelation on Horeb taught Elijah crucial lessons. God works not just through dramatic displays, but through quiet persistence. He speaks not just in spectacular moments, but in whispered guidance, and his plans unfold across multiple generations through many servants, not resting on any single prophet's shoulders. As the sun set behind the ancient peak, Elijah understood. His role remained important, certainly, but not all important. God's work would continue. The story was larger than one man's triumph or failure. With this more humble perspective, Elijah prepared to descend the mountain, ready to follow the quiet voice that had reminded him who was truly in control. The appointment of Elisha, the successor chosen. Elijah came down from the mountain as a changed man. The weight of being Israel's sole defender had lifted somewhat from his shoulders. God had other servants in place, other plans in motion. The prophet's steps were steadier now, his purpose clearer as he journeyed northward through the wilderness in the direction of Damascus. The first two tasks God had assigned him, anointing Hazael as king over Syria and Jehu as king over Israel, would wait for the time being. It was the third commission that drew Elijah forward, locating Elisha, the man who would carry on his work when he was gone. Days passed as Elijah traveled onward. The barren wilderness gave way gradually to more fertile lands. Fields made their appearance, then villages. Signs of human activity increased steadily. The prophet moved through these settled areas quietly, his eyes watchful, his heart attuned to divine guidance. Then, in the vicinity of Abel-Meholah, Elijah spotted a scene of agricultural activity. 12 yoke of oxen plowed a field, moving in rhythmic harmony across the earth. Behind the final pair walked a man, strong and focused, guiding the powerful beasts with practiced hands. This was Elisha, son of Shaphat, working his father's land, completely unaware that his life was about to change forever. Elijah paused, watching. This ordinary farmer would become God's voice to kings. These hands that held plow reins would someday perform miracles. The divine choice often surprises us, finding future leaders in fields rather than in palaces, by fishing boats rather than in temples. Walking across the newly turned soil, Elijah approached the final team of oxen. Without ceremony or explanation, he removed his mantle, the rough outer garment that marked him as a prophet, and threw it over Elisha's shoulders. No words accompanied this action, none were necessary. Both men understood the significance. The mantle was more than simple clothing. It represented prophetic calling, divine authority, spiritual power. By placing it on Elisha, Elijah was communicating, "God has chosen you to follow in my path." Simple yet profound, this symbolic act changed everything. Elisha's response revealed his character. He didn't hesitate or offer excuses. Instead, he left the oxen standing where they were in the field and ran after Elijah, who had already turned to continue his journey. "Let me kiss my father and mother in farewell," Elisha called out, "and then I will follow you." Elijah turned around, his face neither welcoming nor forbidding. "Go back," he replied. "What have I done to you?" The words seem cryptic, but their meaning runs deep. Elijah was communicating, "Consider what you're doing. This is between you and God. The choice must be yours alone." Elisha understood clearly. Returning to his oxen, he made a decisive break with his former life. He slaughtered the pair he had been driving, valuable animals representing significant wealth. Using their wooden yoke as fuel, he built a fire and cooked their meat. This was no small sacrifice, but rather a public declaration that he would not be returning to farming. Gathering the people, likely his workers and family members, Elisha shared the meat with them in a farewell feast. This meal marked transition, celebrated calling, acknowledged the cost of following God's path. When it was finished, Elisha rose, embraced his parents one final time, and went after Elijah to serve him. The relationship that formed between these two men would become one of Scripture's great spiritual mentorships. Elisha didn't immediately step into prophetic shoes. Instead, he became Elijah's servant, learning through observation, through daily tasks, through proximity to a man who walked with God. This pattern of service before leadership, of apprenticeship before authority, echoes throughout biblical history. Joshua served Moses. Timothy served Paul. Even Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. True spiritual leadership grows through humble service, not through grasping for position. For Elijah, finding Elisha brought comfort. The burden of Israel's spiritual future no longer rested solely on his shoulders. God's work would continue beyond his own lifetime. The mantle would pass to worthy hands. Sometimes our greatest act of faith is preparing others to carry on when we are no longer present. As the two prophets traveled together, the older and the younger, the established and the emerging, God's plan continued unfolding. Elijah still had work to accomplish, confrontations to face, words to speak to kings. But now he did so with the knowledge that what God had begun through him would continue through another. The fields of Abel Meholah faded behind them as they journeyed forward. Before them stretched years of collaboration, moments of instruction and discovery, time spent united in purpose. The solitary days that had marked Elijah's life came to an end. The Lord had offered more than simple guidance. He had given companionship for the path that lay before them, a treasure possibly as valuable as the flames that descended from above, or that gentle whisper he had heard, the vineyard belonging to Naboth. Avarice and wrongdoing. Close to the royal residence in Jezreel grew a modest vineyard. The man who owned it, near both, had cared for these plants across many seasons. For him, the property carried profound importance. This was land from his bloodline, transferred through numerous ancestors until it came into his possession. Every grapevine contained within it a chronicle of those who came before, people who had cultivated this very earth. King Ahab frequently passed by this plot. Through his palace window, he observed the orderly lines of vines, becoming green when spring arrived and turning dark purple when harvest approached. One particular day, an idea seized his thoughts. How ideal this location would be for growing herbs, positioned so near to the grounds of royalty. The monarch went to Naboth, presenting what appeared to be a reasonable proposal. "Let me have your vineyard," he requested. "I shall compensate you generously, or exchange it for superior land in another place, should you prefer." However, Naboth refused with a shake of his head. "The Lord does not permit me to surrender the inheritance of my forefathers." Though his tone remained firm, it held respect. Ahab withdrew to his palace, brooding like a young child, refused a desired object. He collapsed onto his bed, directed his face toward the wall, and declined all food. Such was Israel's king. A man possessing everything, yet undone by a single small thing beyond his reach. Jezebel discovered her husband in this pitiful condition. "What causes you such distress?" she inquired. After Ahab recounted Naboth's rejection, a merciless smile appeared on her features. "Is this the manner in which you display your authority as monarch? Rise up, consume something, and restore your spirits. I shall obtain Naboth's vineyard for you." She composed letters using Ahab's identity, marking them with the seal of royalty. These communications traveled to the community leaders and respected citizens of Jezreel, commanding them to announce a period of fasting. Their instructions were to position Naboth in a seat of prominence, then arrange for two individuals to bring accusations against him for speaking curses against the Lord and against the king. The consequence would arrive swiftly: execution through stoning. Events proceeded precisely as Jezebel had arranged. Dishonest witnesses testified against Naboth. Rocks flew through the atmosphere. An honorable man perished for the offense of preserving his ancestral property. His male children were likewise killed, ensuring no descendants remained to lay claim to the vineyard. Jezebel's message arrived brief and direct. "Naboth has died. Proceed now to claim his vineyard." Ahab stood quickly and departed to take possession of what he desired. Walking among the vines that would shortly be removed to make space for his garden, he experienced the sensation of being observed. Upon turning, he noticed a recognizable silhouette positioned at the boundary of the field. Elijah. The monarch's spirit sank. Understanding filled him regarding why this prophet had appeared. "Have you discovered me, the one you consider your adversary?" Ahab questioned. The prophet's response sliced through the motionless air. "I have discovered you, for the reason that you have surrendered yourself to perform evil in the perception of the Lord." The words spoken by the prophet descended like stones, heavier even than those which had ended Naboth's existence. Canines would taste Ahab's blood in the place where they tasted Naboth's. Every male descendant in Ahab's household would be eliminated. Dogs would consume Jezebel beside the fortification of Jezreel. The ruling line of Omri would be erased completely, like a dish thoroughly cleaned and overturned. While Elijah delivered these words, Ahab experienced the burden of divine judgment bearing down upon him. For one rare moment, something within the king's heart yielded. He ripped his garments, dressed himself in rough cloth, and moved about with humility. His movements were measured, his head remained lowered. The vineyard no longer appeared valuable compared to the cost he had incurred. Ahab's insincere remorse, the empty declarations of a monarch, the image of Ahab clothed in sackcloth captured attention across Samaria. Citizens whispered among themselves as he moved past. This powerful king now traveled with dragging footsteps, keeping his gaze downward. He abstained from eating and rested in coarse fabric, presenting himself as a person filled with regret. Reports of this transformation reached Elijah on the wind-swept elevations, where he frequently went for prayer. The Lord addressed him in that place, asking, "Do you observe how Ahab has made himself humble in my presence?" Due to this demonstration of regret, the Lord would delay the catastrophe that had been promised throughout Ahab's remaining years. The punishment would descend upon his son's household instead. Such compassion was extended not because the remorse ran deeply, but because the Lord acknowledges even the slightest movement toward what is right. Still, Ahab's inner being had not genuinely transformed. Similar to dew in the morning that disappears when the sun climbs higher, his show of humility faded away rapidly. Before long, he reverted to his previous patterns, giving attention to dishonest prophets who spoke only what pleased his ears. 3 complete years elapsed without conflict between Israel and Syria. During this period of calm, King Jehoshaphat from Judah traveled northward to meet with Ahab. The two monarchs occupied their thrones at the gateway entrance to Samaria, while prophets displayed their messages in front of them. Ahab recognized an opportunity presenting itself. "Would you accompany me to engage in battle at Ramoth-Gilead?" he posed to Jehoshaphat. The ruler of Judah expressed agreement, but with wisdom suggested they should initially seek guidance from the Lord. Ahab assembled 400 prophets who existed to serve at his command. Speaking as one unified voice, they proclaimed, "Advance to Ramoth-Gilead and achieve victory. The Lord shall deliver it into your possession." Yet Jehoshaphat remained unconvinced. "Does no prophet of the Lord exist here? We should make inquiry." Ahab's expression grew dark. "One man exists, Micaiah, offspring of Imlah. However, I despise him for the reason that he never delivers favorable prophecies concerning me." During the time they awaited Micaiah's arrival, a prophet called Zedekiah constructed horns from iron and performed dramatically, declaring loudly that Ahab would drive the Syrians backward until their destruction was complete. The remaining prophets signaled their enthusiastic approval, understanding what pleased the king's hearing. Upon Micaiah's arrival, initially he repeated their declarations, but something within his manner caused Ahab to demand complete honesty. Micaiah's countenance became grave. "I observed all of Israel dispersed across the mountains, resembling sheep lacking a shepherd." He portrayed a scene from the heavenly realm where the Lord permitted a spirit of deception to occupy the mouths of Ahab's prophets, thereby enticing him toward his demise. Zedekiah responded by striking Micaiah across the face. Ahab commanded that the truthful prophet be confined in prison until his safe return home. Micaiah's departing declaration lingered in the atmosphere. "Should you return in peace, the Lord has not communicated through me." Ahab's false display of remorse had brought him to this moment, still attempting to manipulate truth according to his desires, still surrounding his presence with voices willing to speak only his preferred words. The demise of Ahab, prophecies reaching fulfillment. Dawn arrived over the elevated terrain of Ramoth-Gilead. Moisture glistened on vegetation, soon to be trampled beneath warriors' feet. Ahab made preparations for combat with an unusual petition. Though he had dressed in royal garments numerous times previously, on this day he requested to participate in battle concealed as an ordinary soldier. "However, you shall wear your royal robes," he instructed Jehoshaphat. Did this reflect wisdom, or was it cowardice? Perhaps Ahab recalled Micaiah's declarations. Perhaps he believed he could outsmart destiny by concealing himself from it. Syria's king had issued one directive to his commanders: engage with no person, whether insignificant or significant, only with Israel's king. Throughout the daylight hours, they searched for Ahab's royal garments. Multiple times, they encircled Jehoshaphat, who called out when assaulted. Understanding he was not their intended target, they withdrew. Beneath his helmet, Ahab might have felt satisfaction, considering himself clever. Then the moment occurred, an event that demonstrated no individual can remain hidden from what is destined. An archer pulled his bow backward and released an arrow. His aim was directed at no specific individual, merely shot into the mass of Israel's fighting men. The arrow discovered the narrow opening between Ahab's protective armor and breastplate. "Reverse direction and transport me away from the battle," the monarch whispered to the person driving his chariot. "I have received a wound." Blood collected at Ahab's feet while the combat continued raging. He supported himself upright in his chariot, maintaining a position facing the Syrians, unwilling to allow his troops to experience discouragement. When sunset arrived, Israel's king had ceased living. While Ahab's chariot received washing beside Samaria's pool, canines approached to taste his blood, precisely as Elijah had declared. The information traveled rapidly across the territory. Some expressed mourning, while others nodded quietly, remembering the vineyard of Naboth. Most simply contemplated what developments would follow. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, assumed the position of king in his father's place. The crown transferred to different hands. Yet the shadow cast by Elijah's prophecy continued looming over Ahab's household. From his peaceful location in the mountains, Elijah observed these developments unfolding. One monarch falls, another ascends. This pattern had continued repeating since time's beginning. Still, the prophet understood this narrative remained far from its conclusion. The destruction of Jezebel. Conclusion for a queen. Years moved forward following Ahab's death. Ahaziah had governed briefly prior to falling through a latticed opening in his elevated chamber. At present, Jehoram, another male offspring of Ahab, occupied Israel's throne. Through all these transitions, Jezebel remained an influential force, operating behind the visible leadership, her power as substantial as it had ever been. The Queen Mother continued applying dark coal around her eyes and decorating her head with precious stones. She continued in her worship of Baal and maintained her hatred for Israel's God. Time had neither softened what was in her heart nor reduced her arrogance. Distant from Jezreel, tenses, circumstances were developing that would shortly arrive at the palace entrance. Elijah had been transported to heaven within a whirlwind, but his mission continued through Elisha. At this moment, following God's instruction, Elisha dispatched a young prophet to locate a military leader named Jehu. The young messenger discovered Jehu positioned with his fellow officers. "I possess a communication for you, Commander," he stated, drawing Jehu into a private space. In that place, he poured oil upon Jehu's head and voiced words that would transform everything. "In this manner declares the Lord, Israel's God. I anoint you as king over the Lord's people, over Israel." He informed Jehu regarding his assignment: to strike against Ahab's household, to bring vengeance for the blood of the prophets and all who served the Lord, spilled by Jezebel's hand. He concluded with words that had awaited years to reach fulfillment. "Canines shall consume Jezebel within Jezreel's territory, and none shall provide her burial." Following this, he opened the entrance and departed swiftly. Jehu's men inquired what this unstable individual had desired. After Jehu shared the information, they rapidly spread their garments across the exposed steps for him to stand upon. They sounded the trumpet and made proclamation: "Jehu has become king." The recently anointed monarch wasted no time. He drove his chariot with intense speed toward Jezreel, the location where both King Jehoram of Israel and King Ahaziah of Judah were currently visiting. As the cloud of dust from his approach became visible, a watchman called out from the elevated tower. Messengers received instructions to ask whether Jehu arrived in peace. Each messenger aligned himself with Jehu rather than returning. The manner of driving resembles that of Jehu, offspring of Nimshi. "For his driving is furious," the watchman provided his report. Upon the king's riding forth to meet him, an arrow from Jehu pierced Jehoram's heart. Ahaziah attempted escape, but received a strike as well. The revolution had commenced. Jezebel received word of the disturbance. Understanding filled her regarding what approached. Rather than concealing herself or attempting escape, she applied paint to her eyes, arranged her hair carefully, and positioned herself at an upper window. As Jehu passed through the gate, she called downward to him. "Does it bring peace, you who resemble Zimri, one who murdered his master?" Jehu directed his gaze upward. "Who stands on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 palace servants looked outward at him. "Cast her downward," Jehu commanded. They seized the queen, who had previously caused prophets to experience fear. Without any ceremony, they thrust her through the window opening. Jezebel descended to the courtyard, situated below. Her blood splattered against the wall and upon the horses. Jehu's chariot passed over her. Later, when Jehu declared, "Attend now to this woman under a curse, and provide her burial," for she was a daughter of a king, his servants discovered almost nothing remaining. Dogs had consumed her flesh, leaving merely her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The words spoken by Elijah years earlier beside Naboth's vineyard had arrived at complete fulfillment. The growing influence of Elisha, the transfer of the mantle. The pathway from Jericho extending to Bethel wound its way through terrain of rocky hills. Along this route traveled Elijah and Elisha, teacher and pupil, prophet and the one to follow. Both individuals understood this day differed from all others. An unusual energy filled the atmosphere, a perception that something significant was approaching. "Remain in this place," Elijah instructed his student at each settlement they visited. "The Lord has dispatched me to continue farther." Each occasion, Elisha provided an identical response. "As surely as the Lord maintains life, and as you yourself live, I shall not depart from you." The sons of the prophets, students who gathered surrounding these holy individuals, came to Elisha with expressions of knowing. "Do you comprehend that this day the Lord shall remove your master away from you?" "Yes, understanding fills me," Elisha responded. "Now maintain silence." At the Jordan, Elijah took hold of his cloak, formed it into a roll, and struck the water's surface. The river separated, permitting them to cross upon ground that was dry. On the opposite side, Elijah faced his devoted follower. "Request what I may accomplish for you prior to my being taken away from you." Without any hesitation, Elisha responded, "I ask that a double portion of your spirit might rest upon me." Elijah nodded with measured movement. "You have requested something difficult. Nevertheless, should you observe me during the moment I am taken away from you, it shall become so for you. However, if observation does not occur, it shall not become so." While they continued walking forward, conversing together, a chariot composed of fire and horses of fire materialized. Within a moment, Elijah was lifted upward in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha observed all of it. My father, he called out loudly. "The chariots belonging to Israel and those who ride them." After the dust completed its settling and the sky returned to its closed state, Elisha discovered himself in solitude. At the ground near his feet rested Elijah's cloak, having fallen during the prophet's ascension. He retrieved it, this simple garment that had caused waters to part. Carrying it to the Jordan, he struck the water just as he had observed his teacher perform. "Where exists the Lord, the God belonging to Elijah?" he questioned. The waters underwent separation. Elisha crossed to the other side. The observing sons of the prophets bowed themselves low in his presence. The spirit belonging to Elijah now rests upon Elisha, they communicated to one another. During the days that came after, Elisha restored bitter waters using salt. He summoned bears from the woodland to bring punishment upon youths who expressed mockery toward him. He caused ditches to fill with water for an army experiencing thirst, and caused a widow's oil to increase in order to settle her debts. He made a promise of a child to a woman unable to bear, and subsequently brought that same child back from death, where Elijah had resembled fire. Sudden, brilliant, all-consuming, Elisha moved among the population. Where his teacher had existed in wilderness and cave dwellings, Elisha frequently remained in settlements, instructing the sons of the prophets. His miraculous acts touched everyday existence, restoring stew, locating lost axe heads, bringing healing to leprosy. The mantle had undergone its transfer. The work continued within different hands. Still, both prophets provided service to the same unchanging Lord. Both summoned Israel backward toward genuine worship. Both positioned themselves in opposition to kings when circumstances required. Far toward the north, within the heavenly realms, Elijah observed his successor at work. Perhaps satisfaction filled him to witness how the double portion received its use. Perhaps understanding filled him that eventually, within God's perfect timing, one additional task on earth would require his performance. The concluding days of Elijah, final journey of a prophet. While the sun cast extended shadows across Gilgal's hills, Elijah possessed knowledge that his time on earth was approaching its close. The atmosphere appeared different that morning, more crisp, filled with whispers regarding what approached. The aging prophet directed his attention toward his devoted companion Elisha, his eyes reflecting years of divine service. "Remain in this location," Elijah stated gently, "for the Lord has sent me toward Bethel." His voice carried no command, merely an invitation to respect the sacred journey he prepared to undertake. However, Elisha sensed this day's significance. "As certainly as the Lord maintains life, and as you maintain life," he responded with quiet determination, "I shall not leave you." The connection between teacher and student had developed too profoundly for separation. Together now they traveled the dusty pathway to Bethel, their footsteps matched in rhythm, their silence comfortable. Within Bethel, the sons of the prophets came to Elisha, drawing him aside with knowing glances. "Do you comprehend?" they whispered. "The Lord shall remove your master from you this day." Elisha nodded with slow movement. "Yes, understanding fills me," he answered. "Now, I ask you to be silent." He required no reminders regarding what his heart already comprehended. The journey proceeded to Jericho, with Elijah once more suggesting Elisha remain at that location. Once more, the loyal disciple refused. The pattern repeated itself upon their arrival at the Jordan River, a test of devotion that Elisha passed without any hesitation. While they positioned themselves at the riverbank, 50 sons of the prophets observed from a distance, witnesses to history's unfolding. These individuals had studied beneath Elijah, gained learning from his wisdom, observed his courage. At this moment, they assembled to honor his concluding hours among them. Elijah removed his cloak, the mantle that had become synonymous with his prophetic position. He folded the worn fabric with care, then struck the Jordan's waters. The river underwent separation before them, creating a pathway of dry ground between flowing walls composed of water. Teacher and disciple crossed over in solitude now, leaving behind the world of ordinary individuals. Upon the eastern shore, their footprints marked the commencement of the final earthly path Elijah would ever travel. "Request what I may accomplish for you," Elijah stated gently, "prior to my being taken away from you." Elisha experienced no hesitation. "I ask that a double portion of your spirit might rest upon me." Elijah's eyes softened with comprehension. "You have made a difficult request," he responded. "Nevertheless, should you observe me during my being taken from you, it shall become so for you. However, if not, it shall not become so." The two prophets proceeded walking, their conversation flowing naturally, despite the burden of imminent farewell. They spoke regarding simple things, memories involving shared meals, prayers offered in unity, stars counted during watches of the night. These quiet moments contained as much significance as any miracle they had witnessed. The gentle breeze transported the scent of flowers growing wild as they climbed a small elevation. Birds communicated with one another within nearby trees. The world appeared unusually vivid, colors more intense, sounds possessing greater clarity, as though heaven had begun overlaying earth within that sacred space. Neither individual possessed knowledge regarding precisely when the chariot would materialize or how the transition would occur. This uncertainty maintained them present within each moment, attentive to one another and to the divine presence that had provided guidance for their lives. Elijah paused on occasion for rest, not from physical exhaustion, but to appreciate these concluding moments of earthly existence. His face reflected peace rather than apprehension. Death or transformation contained no fear for one who had traveled so closely with the Lord. As daylight commenced fading, Elijah shared wisdom born from years of prophetic service. He spoke regarding faith throughout drought, courage in the presence of kings, and listening for that still, gentle voice. Every word represented a gift, a final lesson from teacher to student. The sky positioned above remained clear, stars commencing to appear individually. Nature itself appeared to hold its breath in anticipation. Something extraordinary prepared to occur upon this ordinary portion of earth. Crossing the Jordan. The Jordan, a passage of miracle. The Jordan River maintained its flow as it had across countless generations. Its waters transported silt from mountains in the north toward the Dead Sea. For most travelers, it represented an obstacle to be crossed by boat or constructed bridge. However, for prophets of God, it became a demonstration of divine power. During their approach to its banks earlier that day, they positioned themselves before rushing waters that displayed no indication of yielding. 50 prophets observed from the hillside. Wondering how these two would accomplish the crossing, Elijah removed his mantle, a simple garment that had become synonymous with his identity. With weathered hands that had previously summoned fire from heaven, he formed the cloak into a makeshift staff. Then, with quiet confidence, he struck the surface of the water. The impact created outward ripples. And then, miracle occurred. The waters underwent separation. Not gradually, not partially, but completely. A pathway of dry ground materialized between walls, composed of suspended water. The river's flow halted in divine obedience to the prophet's faith. This moment created echoes of Israel's sacred history. Centuries in the past, Joshua had guided the population across this identical river upon dry ground, transporting the Ark of the Covenant. At present, Elijah and Elisha crossed over, linking past to present within God's unfolding narrative. While their feet made contact with dry riverbed, small pebbles produced crunching sounds beneath their sandals. Fish moved quickly within the water walls, flanking their pathway. Sunlight filtered through the liquid barriers, casting shimmering patterns across the exposed ground. The 50 prophets, observing from the distance, experienced silence falling upon them in awe. Comprehension filled them that they witnessed not merely a miracle, but a sign. The God who divided waters for Moses and Joshua now performed the same for Elijah, confirming the continuity of divine purpose across generations. For Elisha, every step across the riverbed increased his faith. This miracle was not intended to impress, but to provide instruction. The God who controlled waters could certainly arrange what would occur next. The transfer of prophetic office from teacher to disciple. Upon reaching the eastern shore, they turned briefly to observe the waters rushing back into unity, resuming their eternal journey toward the Dead Sea. The river continued as it had before. Still, everything had undergone change. At present, on the wilderness side of Jordan, they traveled in solitude. This barren landscape had provided nourishment for prophets preceding them. Moses had ceased living within these hills after glimpsing the land of promise. The terrain was harsh, yet holy. They followed no specific pathway, allowing divine guidance to direct their steps. Rocky formations provided occasional shade from the afternoon sun. Within the distance, mountains rose purple against the sky, sentinels observing over the unfolding sacred drama. Elisha remained attentive to every word and gesture from his master, understanding that these teachings would shortly transform into memories to provide him sustenance. Each conversation took on heightened importance. Final instructions preceding Elijah's departure. The miracle at Jordan had provided confirmation of God's presence, yet it also presented questions. Should the Lord possess ability to interrupt the course of nature for a river crossing, what transformation awaited Elijah? The ancient patterns governing life and death might yield to something entirely different. While the day advanced, Elisha noticed subtle changes within the quality of light surrounding them. The atmosphere appeared charged with expectancy. Even common objects, rocks, trees, clouds, appeared possessing greater vividness, as though observed through heaven's lens. Their conversation flowed naturally despite the burden of what approached. Elijah shared narratives from his early days as a prophet, memories typically maintained as private. At present, with time growing scarce, he opened this treasury to his successor. Remember, Elijah stated quietly while they rested beneath a solitary tree. Power arrives not within earthquake, wind, or fire, but within God's whispered presence. He paused, observing a hawk creating circles overhead. Learn to recognize that voice amid the clamor of life. Elisha nodded, storing away these words like precious gems. Subsequently, when facing his own trials, he would recall this wisdom spoken within the wilderness beyond Jordan. While they proceeded walking, the landscape commenced changing subtly. The air developed greater thinness, greater crispness, as though they climbed toward some invisible threshold. Neither individual spoke regarding it, yet both sensed the boundary separating worlds was growing permeable surrounding them, the chariot composed of fire, the heavenly departure. The afternoon light grew softer, while Elijah and Elisha proceeded with their final journey in unity. Neither possessed knowledge regarding exactly when or how the separation would transpire, only that it approached with immediacy. This uncertainty maintained them fully present within each shared moment. Their conversation flowed naturally between practical matters and spiritual insights. Elijah offered final counsel regarding the prophetic communities Elisha would shortly guide. His voice transported the gentle authority belonging to one who had traveled faithfully with God across decades of service. Without warning, the atmosphere surrounding them underwent change. The air developed a charge of energy, resembling the moments preceding a storm. Still, the sky remained clear, painted with the golden hues belonging to approaching sunset. "Do you experience it?" Elijah questioned softly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Elisha nodded, unable to discover words for the holy dread and wonder filling his heart. The ground positioned beneath their feet appeared to vibrate with subtle power. Birds experienced silence falling upon them within nearby trees. Even the wind maintained its breath. Then it materialized, a chariot composed of fire, pulled by horses of flame, appearing not from earth, but from the very fabric of light itself. The vision challenged natural categories. These were not earthly flames that consume and bring destruction, but living fire, pure energy shaped through divine will. The horses moved without making contact with ground, their manes flickering like torches within wind. The chariot gleamed with unearthly brilliance, too dazzling to study directly, yet impossible to disregard. Heat radiated from the apparition, not burning but purifying, resembling the warmth of profound healing. Between the two prophets, a whirlwind formed, a spiral composed of air and light, connecting earth to heaven. It lifted Elijah gently, separating him from the ground he had traveled for decades. His feet no longer made contact with soil. He existed between worlds. "My father! My father!" Elisha called out. "The chariots belonging to Israel and those who ride them." These were not words expressing despair, but recognition. Within this singular, transcendent moment, Elisha grasped comprehension regarding what Elijah had truly been. Not merely one prophet, but Israel's spiritual defense, possessing greater power than armies. While the whirlwind transported Elijah upward, his mantle slipped away from his shoulders, floating downward through shimmering air. The cloak, representing prophetic office and divine authority, descended resembling a leaf on autumn wind, landing softly at Elisha's feet. The transfer reached completion. No ceremony, no formal declarations, simply a gift descending from heaven into hands that awaited. Elisha bent to retrieve the mantle, his fingers trembling while they closed around the familiar fabric now entrusted to him. Upon looking upward once more, the vision experienced fading. The chariot, the horses, the whirlwind, all ascending beyond mortal sight. For a moment, heaven's curtain had undergone parting, permitting a glimpse of glory, possessing too much brightness for earthly eyes. Elisha positioned himself alone on the plain, clutching the mantle. The air gradually experienced cooling surrounding him. Birds resumed their evening songs. The world settled backward into ordinary rhythms, though nothing would ever possess truly ordinary quality again, following what he had witnessed. Elijah had not ceased living as other individuals cease living. He had been translated, transformed, taken by God in a manner that transcended death's usual patterns. The prophet who had challenged kings, summoned fire downward, and stood in solitude for truth, had received a departure as remarkable as his life had proven. While shadows lengthened across the landscape, Elisha turned backward toward the Jordan River. The mantle within his hands represented not merely responsibility, but confirmation. He had observed Elijah's departure, the condition for receiving the double portion he had requested. Night approached. Stars materialized individually within the darkening sky, somewhere beyond their light, beyond the veil of visible creation. Elijah continued within God's presence. His earthly ministry had concluded, yet his spiritual influence had only commenced its unfolding. The cool evening breeze brought dryness to the tears on Elisha's face. Tomorrow would bring different challenges, different battles against idolatry, different opportunities to demonstrate God's power. However, tonight existed for reflection, for honoring the transition from one prophetic era to another. He wrapped Elijah's mantle around his shoulders, feeling its weight settling upon him, not merely a garment, but a calling, not merely fabric, but faith made tangible. With every step backward toward the Jordan, Elisha commenced understanding what it signified to carry forward a legacy received directly from heaven, the first miracles of Elisha, evidence of the double portion. The morning following Elijah's departure arrived, clear and bright. Elisha positioned himself at the Jordan River's edge, the same waters his teacher had parted merely yesterday. At present, he faced them in solitude, Elijah's mantle draped across his shoulders, a tangible reminder regarding what had occurred and what received expectation now. 50 prophets observed from a distance, curious whether Elijah's power had genuinely transferred to his successor. They had witnessed the master's miracles across years. Would the student demonstrate equality to the legacy he had inherited? Elisha removed the mantle from his shoulders, feeling its familiar weight within his hands. This simple garment had made contact with heaven's fire, had fallen from Elijah's shoulders during his ascension within the whirlwind. At present, it represented the double portion of spirit Elisha had requested. Where exists the Lord, the God, belonging to Elijah? He called outward, not questioning, but invoking, claiming the relationship that had empowered his mentor. Then, with movements creating echoes of Elijah's final miracle, he struck the water with the folded mantle. For a heartbeat, nothing occurred. The river maintained its flow unchanged. Within that suspended moment, doubt might have entered a lesser individual's heart. However, Elisha stood with firmness, trusting not in garments or gestures, but within the living God who had answered Elijah. Then the waters underwent parting, dividing toward the right and left. A pathway composed of dry ground materialized between flowing walls, identical to yesterday's miracle. The 50 observing prophets gasped collectively, then bowed in recognition. The spirit belonging to Elijah now rests upon Elisha, they declared. This first miracle provided service as divine confirmation. The passing of the mantle was no mere symbolism, but spiritual reality. Elisha had indeed received what he requested, the double portion belonging to his master's spirit. Following the crossing of the Jordan, Elisha journeyed to Jericho, where he encountered his subsequent challenge. The city's elders approached with troubled expressions. "Our settlement is pleasant," they explained, "yet the water possesses badness and causes death. A spring that should have brought life, instead transported sickness." Elisha listened with compassion. His first healing would not be directed toward a person, but toward a community's water source. an element essential for all life. Bring to me a new bowl, he instructed, and place salt within it. Upon their bringing these simple items, Elisha traveled to the spring source. In that location, he cast the salt into the waters, declaring, "In this manner, declares the Lord, I have healed these waters." With these words, the spring underwent transformation, its waters made wholesome and life-giving. Unlike the dramatic fire upon Mount Carmel, this miracle addressed basic human necessity. Clean water signified health for children, nourishment for gardens, life for livestock. Through this practical blessing, Elisha demonstrated that God maintains care regarding everyday suffering. The healed spring would maintain its flowing across generations, a lasting reminder regarding divine compassion. Every child who consumed water without experiencing illness, every field that flourished with its irrigation, all testified to God's ongoing presence through his prophet. From Jericho, Elisha traveled to Bethel, a center of calf worship beneath Jeroboam. During his approach to the settlement, young men emerged, expressing mockery toward both his appearance and his claim to Elijah's office. "Ascend upward, you without hair," they jeered, referencing Elijah's ascension while insulting Elisha. These were not innocent children, but young adults, deliberately rejecting prophetic authority. Their contempt represented deeper spiritual rebellion within Bethel, where false worship had displaced true devotion. Elisha turned and directed his gaze at them, pronouncing judgment within God's name. From nearby woodland, 2 bears emerged and attacked 42 of the mockers. This severe consequence demonstrated that rejecting God's messengers transported serious implications. Unlike his water-healing miracle, this event displayed another facet of prophetic office, upholding divine honor against blatant disrespect. The prophet brought blessing toward the respectful, yet could not prevent consequences for those who deliberately scorned God's authority. Following these initial demonstrations of power, Elisha proceeded to Carmel, where Elijah had previously summoned fire downward from heaven. In that location, he spent time within prayer and communion with God, seeking direction for his ministry ahead. His circle of influence commenced widening as words spread regarding the new prophet. Some compared him to Elijah, noting similarities and differences. Where Elijah had resembled fire, intense, consuming, frequently solitary, Elisha moved among the population, healing and teaching with quieter strength. Still, both provided service to the same God with unwavering faithfulness. Both confronted idolatry and summoned Israel backward toward covenant relationships. Both performed miracles that demonstrated divine power over nature and human affairs. While days passed, Elisha established relationships with the prophetic communities his teacher had guided. He offered guidance, settled disputes, and continued the work of training future spiritual leaders. The double portion manifested not merely through miracles, but within wisdom for leadership. News eventually arrived to King Jehoram regarding Elisha's emergence as Israel's foremost prophet. Royal attention would shortly bring different challenges and opportunities. The king who had accommodated Baal worship must at present reckon with another fearless voice for Yahweh. Elisha's pathway was taking shape, different from Elijah's, yet continuing the same essential mission. Each miracle provided confirmation that God remained active within Israel despite the nation's spiritual wandering. Each healing and judgment pointed toward the covenant relationship Israel had neglected. The mantle rested securely upon different shoulders. The spirit that had empowered Elijah at present worked through Elisha, sometimes in familiar ways, sometimes in surprising new expressions, yet always with the same purpose: summoning people backward to the living God. The spirit belonging to Elijah, legacy and echoes within later scripture. While seasons passed following Elijah's departure, his influence proceeded to ripple through Israel's spiritual landscape. Though physically absent, his spirit, his passion for truth, his unwavering stand in opposition to idolatry, his intimate connection with God, lived onward through Elisha and beyond. Elisha transported forward his master's work, performing twice as numerous recorded miracles as Elijah had accomplished. The double portion manifested through practical ways, healing those with leprosy, multiplying food, raising the dead, advising kings. Within each act, echoes belonging to Elijah's ministry could be discerned. Narratives regarding the great prophet spread across the region. Parents assigned children names after him, hoping some measure belonging to his courage might touch the subsequent generation. Surrounding evening fires, elders recounted his confrontation with Baal's prophets, his flight to Mount Horeb, his final ascent within the chariot of fire. However, Elijah's legacy extended far beyond folklore. The prophet Malachi, composing writings centuries subsequently, delivered a profound message. "Behold, I shall send to you Elijah the prophet prior to the great and awesome day belonging to the Lord arriving." This promise planted Elijah firmly within Israel's future alongside its past. The population commenced watching for signs regarding his return. Some believed he would materialize in physical form, others that his spirit would manifest through another prophet. This expectation created a framework for recognizing God's decisive actions within history. Throughout times of spiritual drought, faithful remnants discovered courage through remembering Elijah. One individual who had remained true during a time when an entire nation turned away. His solitary stand at Carmel transformed into a template for fidelity amid widespread compromise. Within Jewish tradition, a place received setting for Elijah at Passover celebrations, an empty chair and cup awaiting the herald of redemption. This custom transformed memory into hope, linking past deliverance with future restoration. The centuries underwent passing. Israel fell to Assyria, Judah to Babylon. Exiles returned and rebuilt the temple. Foreign powers claimed the land of promise. Through these national tragedies and partial restorations, Elijah's memory remained a golden thread within Israel's tapestry. Then, throughout the Roman occupation, a strange figure materialized within the Judean wilderness. John the Baptist emerged from solitude, wearing simple garments, speaking words of fire. His ministry beside the Jordan River struck numerous individuals as familiar, a voice calling within the wilderness, uncompromising in its demand for repentance. When questioned regarding his identity, John denied being Elijah reincarnated. Still, Jesus subsequently told his disciples, "Should you be willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to arrive." The spirit belonging to Elijah had indeed returned through John. Not physical reincarnation, but spiritual succession. John prepared the way for one greater than himself, just as Elijah had prepared Israel and appointed Elisha. Both prophets redirected attention away from themselves toward God's unfolding purposes. Both existed as bridges between eras within salvation history. Jesus himself experienced occasional mistaken identity as Elijah by crowds attempting to categorize his ministry. This confusion revealed how profoundly Elijah's archetypal prophet image had embedded itself within Jewish consciousness across the centuries. At Jesus' transfiguration upon a mountain, Elijah materialized alongside Moses, conversing with the Messiah regarding his departure. The prophet who had been transported to heaven without dying positioned himself with the lawgiver, representing the foundation of Israel's covenant relationship with God. Their presence provided confirmation regarding Jesus as fulfillment of both law and prophets. Elijah's appearance also reinforced his role as forerunner and witness to messianic identity. The circle that commenced at Carmel at present completed itself upon another mountaintop. Early Christians recognized connections between Elijah's ministry and Christ's. Both confronted corrupt religious and political systems. Both performed nature miracles, demonstrating divine authority. Both experienced periods of rejection and withdrawal. Both received sustenance by God within wilderness settings. While Christianity spread beyond Jewish communities, Elijah's narrative traveled with it. His miracles received understanding as foreshadowing Christ's greater works. His victory over false prophets prefigured spiritual triumph over paganism. His ascension offered hope regarding bodily resurrection. Within Eastern Orthodox tradition, Elijah became venerated as a saint, his icon displaying him ascending within the fiery chariot. Monasteries dedicated to him materialized on mountains, continuing his legacy of solitary devotion amid dominant cultures of compromise. Centuries subsequently, Elijah's spirit would inspire reform movements within Judaism and Christianity. When religious institutions developed corruption or compromise, voices crying within the wilderness emerged, uncompromising, unbought, unafraid, each a new embodiment of Elijah's prophetic stance. The essence belonging to Elijah transcended time and culture. Not merely a historical figure, but a spiritual archetype. Whenever truth faces overwhelming opposition, whenever faithful remnants stand against prevailing corruption, whenever heaven's fire must purge earth's altars, there Elijah's spirit manifests once more. His legacy provides reminder to us that one person standing firmly with God constitutes a majority. His narrative whispers courage to solitary believers within hostile environments. His life testifies that apparent defeat frequently precedes divine vindication. His departure promises that faithful service leads not toward death, but transformation. The mantle descends through generations, caught by hands, ready to continue the work of restoration. The spirit belonging to Elijah never genuinely departed. It merely awaits each new moment when God's truth must challenge comfortable compromise, when divine fire must descend once more upon waiting altars. The prophecies belonging to Malachi, the return of Elijah. While you settle into position and prepare to drift towards sleep, let us explore how Elijah's narrative continues, long following his fiery chariot ride toward heaven. Within the gentle whispers of time, his name lived onward through prophecy and promise. The final book belonging to the Hebrew Bible, composed by the prophet Malachi, speaks regarding Elijah in a manner that bridges past and future. Malachi existed approximately 400 years following Elijah. Still, the memory belonging to the great prophet remained vivid within the hearts of the population. See, I shall send the prophet Elijah to you prior to that great and dreadful day belonging to the Lord arriving, Malachi composed. These words descended like soft rain upon a population longing for hope. The promise was not that Elijah himself would return in physical form, but that his spirit, his zeal for truth and justice, would arrive once more through another. This prophecy created a sense of waiting, gentle expectation among the Jewish population. Within homes and synagogues, in quiet moments of prayer, they directed their gaze forward to observing Elijah once more. They believed he would return as a harbinger, belonging to the Messiah, preparing the way, resembling morning light preceding the sunrise. The words belonging to Malachi brought comfort throughout dark times. When the temple experienced destruction and the population experienced scattering, they held close the belief that Elijah would arrive once more to turn the hearts of parents toward their children and the hearts of children toward their parents. A promise of healing for broken families and torn communities. Jewish sages pondered what this return might resemble. Would he materialize suddenly upon a hillside? Would he travel through the marketplace, recognized by few? Or would his spirit simply fill another chosen vessel? The mystery added to the narrative's power. leaving room for wonder while generations arrived and departed. Some teachers stated Elijah would resolve all unsettled questions regarding religious law. Others believed he would restore lost treasures belonging to the temple. Numerous individuals thought he would simply bring peace to a troubled world. These varied hopes blended together, resembling stars within the night sky, each adding its glow to the tapestry of faith. The waiting for Elijah transformed into part of Jewish life and ritual. At Passover, a cup receives filling and a door undergoes opening for the prophet who might enter any home, any night, bringing news of redemption. Children observe with heavy eyelids, hoping to glimpse the visitor from beyond. Within the hills of Judea, narratives receive telling regarding travelers who might be Elijah in disguise. A stranger who materializes with wise counsel, then vanishes. A poor individual who turns out to be a blessing. The line separating myth from faith became delicate, and Elijah continued living within people's hearts rather than within the pages of history books. The prophecy spoken by Malachi stayed vibrant and alive among his followers across generations of transformation. Monarchs ascended to power and then collapsed. Imperial systems expanded only to disintegrate. Still, the quiet expectation of the prophet's eventual return persisted without wavering, much like a tiny spark that refuses to be extinguished. And with the passage of time, this spark would illuminate the path forward to fresh chapters within the narrative. Chapters in which the essence of Elijah would discover renewed significance in surprising forms, influencing existence far beyond Israel's territories, extending into belief systems not yet conceived when he initially summoned flames down from the heavens. Now, while your breathing becomes slower and deeper and your mind starts to wander, envision that same patient anticipation, that same tender hope which sustained countless generations. Allow the narrative to guide you into your dreams, just as ancient prophecy carried Elijah's legacy across the ages. The connection to the Messiah, the relationship between Elijah and John the Baptist. Just as celestial bodies appear more luminous when darkness intensifies, the link connecting Elijah to the anticipated Messiah became increasingly evident as centuries unfolded. This connection reached its most complete form through John the Baptist, an untamed and remarkable individual who stepped out from the wilderness of Judea. Envision someone clothed in fabric woven from camel's hair, wearing a leather strap fastened around his middle. What he consumed was uncomplicated, insects and honey found in the wild. His proclamation was equally straightforward. Make ready the path for the Lord. Should these descriptions bring another wilderness prophet to mind that was entirely intentional? John emerged during an era marked by intense longing. The weight of Roman occupation pressed down heavily upon Jewish communities, and countless individuals turned to prophecies from long ago, seeking solace. They recalled the words Malachi had spoken regarding Elijah's appearance before the great and terrible day of the Lord would arrive. They observed and waited with hearts full of patience. Within the Gospel according to Luke, a heavenly messenger reveals to John's father the future purpose his son would serve. He shall proceed ahead of the Lord, carrying the spirit and strength of Elijah, turning the affections of mothers and fathers back toward their children, and guiding those who have strayed toward the understanding of those who live righteously, preparing a community made ready for the Lord. These declarations mirror Malachi's words so precisely that anyone listening would have immediately understood the parallel. John wasn't claiming to literally be Elijah brought back to life. Rather, he was someone who embodied Elijah's essence, his fearlessness, his divine appointment to declare truth before those in authority, his function as the one who comes before. John performed baptisms within the Jordan River, close to the location where Elijah had once separated the flowing waters using his mantle. Crowds arrived from distant places to listen to his words. His voice resonated across the water with the force of thunder, occasionally severe, consistently truthful, urging hearts toward transformation before time ran out. When people questioned him directly about whether he was Elijah, John answered in the negative. However, Jesus would subsequently tell those who followed him that if they could embrace it, John represented the Elijah whose coming had been foretold. This subtle contradiction contains a more profound reality. John carried within him the spirit of Elijah while maintaining his own distinct identity. Similar to how Elijah confronted King Ahab, John appeared before King Herod without any trace of fear. He spoke out against the king's union with the wife of his brother, valuing moral conviction above his own well-being. This bravery would ultimately lead to John's execution, comparable to how Elijah had once escaped from the fury of royalty. Both prophets embraced simplicity in their living, turning away from material ease and extravagance. Both emerged suddenly into public view, bearing messages that unsettled the powerful. Both summoned people toward genuine devotion rather than meaningless ceremony. The similarities create an elegant design spanning the centuries. John made preparations for the arrival of Jesus, just as there was an expectation that Elijah would prepare the path for the Messiah. During the moment when Jesus underwent transfiguration upon the mountain, both Moses and Elijah materialized at his side. The law and the voices of prophecy standing as witnesses to something unprecedented taking shape. Certain individuals who observed Jesus' execution believed they heard him crying out for Elijah during his dying moments. The association between these figures had grown so powerful within the collective consciousness that even in death, their stories remained intertwined. Those who followed Christ came to interpret John as the fulfillment of Malachi's prophetic words about Elijah's return. This understanding didn't lessen their reverence for the original prophet. Instead, it broadened his narrative, demonstrating how patterns ordained by the divine repeat themselves and create echoes throughout the course of history. The bond shared among Elijah, John, and Jesus teaches us that profound narratives never truly conclude. They evolve and transform. Waterways merge into other waterways. Stars become components of grander celestial formations. And as your awareness gently moves towards slumber, you might recognize how your personal narrative connects to ancient ones, recurring patterns resembling the rhythm of ocean waves upon the shoreline. Elijah within Jewish customs, Passover observances, and the unoccupied seat. As dusk arrives and daylight surrenders to darkness, Jewish households across the globe make their homes ready for the Passover celebration. Among the numerous cherished practices associated with this festival exists one particular tradition that maintains Elijah's presence within Jewish existence: the ritual of Elijah's cup. Upon the Seder table, surrounded by the symbolic foods that recount the narrative of liberation from Egypt, rests an additional cup filled with wine. This vessel remains untouched by any person's hands during the entire meal. It awaits an invisible visitor, a guest arriving from beyond our earthly realm, the prophet Elijah. Further into the evening, frequently, when the eyes of children grow drowsy with exhaustion, someone goes to open the door, welcoming the prophet inside. The instant combines expectation with wonder. Nobody anticipates actually seeing Elijah walk across the threshold. Nevertheless, the ceremony recognizes that deliverance might manifest when we least anticipate it. Certain families observe the wine within Elijah's cup throughout this particular moment, watching for any disturbance upon its surface that could suggest an unseen presence. Sometimes parents softly breathe across the cup or gently tap upon the table, creating the appearance of movement, preserving a sense of marvel within youthful hearts. This practice developed from multiple streams of customary observance. In times past, the fifth cup of wine during Passover remained an unresolved question. Was it meant to be consumed or left untouched? Religious scholars determined to leave this question for Elijah himself to settle upon his return, when he would provide answers to all matters left unresolved. What started as scholarly discussion evolved into a meaningful expression of hope. Beyond the Seder table, Elijah makes appearances throughout Jewish storytelling as a traveler who delivers assistance in unforeseen ways. He shows up in the appearance of an impoverished wanderer, an unfamiliar face requesting refuge. Those who extend kindness toward this visitor frequently realize afterward that they have welcomed the prophet into their midst. These narratives teach that sacred encounters may arrive in humble forms. Someone begging might be a prophet. An unknown person might carry messages from the divine. They promote generosity and receptiveness, characteristics that Elijah himself demonstrated through his compassion toward the widow who lived in Zarephath. During Jewish circumcision rituals, a designated chair remains set apart for Elijah, protector of the sacred covenant. Parents momentarily place their 8-day-old infant boys within this chair before the ceremony commences. This tradition recalls Elijah's passionate devotion to the covenant during his confrontation with those who prophesied for Baal, confirming that every newly born Jewish child carries forward an ancient heritage. Elijah also features in Havdalah ceremonies, marking the conclusion of the Sabbath. As the weekly period of rest ends and labor resumes, Jewish communities sing about Elijah the prophet, Elijah of Tishbe, expressing hope for his swift arrival in their time alongside the Messiah, descendant of David. The prophet serves as a bridge between holy time and everyday existence. Within mystical traditions, Elijah became connected with concealed wisdom. Stories describe him visiting rabbis and learned scholars, unveiling secrets concerning Torah that remained previously hidden. He symbolizes divine revelation, understanding that arrives not solely through intellectual study, but through heavenly grace. Throughout periods of oppression, the figure of Elijah provided distinctive comfort. When Jewish communities experienced brutality and forced displacement across medieval Europe, Elijah represented divine remembrance, an assurance that they remained unforgotten, that fairness would arrive eventually. The vacant chair, the cup set aside and waiting, the doorway thrown open toward the night. These customs convert absence into a form of presence. Although Elijah departed ages ago, Jewish tradition maintains him perpetually accessible just past the entrance, prepared to announce improved days when hardship will cease. As sleep approaches more closely, you might picture that cup of wine reflecting the flickering candlelight, the open door, permitting a refreshing evening wind to enter. Sometimes, what is absent generates its own unique form of presence, and the act of waiting transforms into something sacred by itself. Elijah in Christian observance, previewing the Christ. Tender darkness embraces us at this moment as we examine how followers of Christ view Elijah. For believers in Jesus, this prophet from antiquity became an essential connection for comprehending their own faith journey, a pathway linking what existed before with what was beginning to unfold. Upon an elevated mountain, Jesus brought 3 of his disciples away from the multitudes, Peter, James, and John. There, something extraordinary took place. Jesus underwent transfiguration before their eyes. His countenance radiated like the sun itself, his garments transformed into brilliant white, and materializing beside him were Moses and Elijah, engaged in conversation with him. This incident, recorded within 3 of the 4 gospel accounts, positions Elijah directly at the heart of Christian comprehension. Moses embodied the law, Elijah embodied the prophetic tradition. Standing together, they spoke with Jesus, implying continuity instead of separation between traditions. What came before wasn't destroyed but brought to completion. The disciples were struck with awe. Peter, uncertain perhaps about what words to speak, suggested building 3 temporary shelters. One for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Before this plan could be carried out, a cloud surrounded them, and a voice proclaimed, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to what he says." When the cloud departed, Jesus alone remained. Early believers in Christ discovered profound significance within this narrative. Elijah's appearance during the Transfiguration validated Jesus' position as the culmination of prophetic expectation. The prophet who hadn't experienced death but was carried upward returned to testify concerning one whose death and rising would revolutionize everything. Looking beyond the gospel narratives, Elijah's journey provided Christians with meaningful patterns for understanding their personal faith experiences. His period of solitude within the wilderness mirrored Jesus' 40 days of spiritual testing. His restoration of life to the widow's son pointed toward greater resurrections yet to come. The gentle, quiet voice that addressed Elijah upon Mount Horeb reminded Christians that divine action frequently operates through subtlety rather than spectacle. This influenced how many interpreted spiritual encounters, not always as spectacular as fire descending from heaven, but sometimes as hushed as a murmur within the spirit. Monastic communities discovered particular encouragement in Elijah. His isolation beside the brook called Cherith and upon Mount Horeb presented a pattern for those pursuing God through silence and unadorned living. Certain religious communities, especially the Carmelites, assert a particular connection to the prophet through their beginnings on Mount Carmel. Religious icons and sacred artwork regularly portray Elijah together with other prophets and holy figures. Within Eastern Orthodox places of worship, he frequently appears with striking drama, rising upward within his flaming chariot or accepting nourishment from ravens. These visual representations maintained his narrative fresh within the consciousness of worshippers who might never personally read the scriptures. Medieval Christians occasionally merged Elijah with other legendary figures connected to fire and celestial vehicles, perceiving parallels with sun deities and heavenly journeys. Although these understandings diverged from scriptural accounts, they demonstrate how profoundly Elijah captivated the imagination. His patient waiting to hear God's voice provided lessons in patience. His bold confrontation with authority demonstrated courage. His despair beneath the broom tree validated honesty regarding human limitations. Christians across the ages have discovered themselves within various portions of Elijah's journey, drawing fortitude from his example. Certain Christian traditions preserve a variation of the Jewish anticipation that Elijah will make his return before the ultimate day of divine judgment. Especially within Eastern churches, he receives veneration as someone who will appear once more to bear witness to truth during troubled times. As your conscious awareness drifts gently toward sleep, reflect upon how narratives travel across the boundaries of time and belief systems, assuming new forms while preserving their fundamental truth. Similar to water conforming to various containers, Elijah's account has provided nourishment to different communities while remaining identifiably itself. Elijah in Islamic observance, a prophet's honored legacy. As night grows deeper and stars rotate overhead, let us direct our focus toward how Elijah, identified as Ilyas in the Arabic language, endures within Islamic tradition. Although referenced less often than certain other prophets within the Quran, he maintains a place of honor among those selected to convey divine revelation. The Quran acknowledges Elijah as being among the righteous, placing him alongside other prophets recognized from biblical heritage. Peace be upon Ilyas, declares Surah 37, confirming his standing as a messenger deserving of remembrance and esteem. Islamic interpretations elaborate upon these concise Quranic mentions. They describe how Elijah received his mission to the inhabitants of Baalbek within the Lebanon territory, where devotion to Baal had persisted across generations. Similar to his biblical equivalent, the Ilyas of Islamic tradition stood resolutely in opposition to idol worship. The narrative develops with recognizable components. A prophet summoning people to return to worship of the singular true God, encountering refusal and antagonism, yet maintaining unwavering commitment to his calling. These motifs echo throughout all three Abrahamic faith traditions, forming connecting threads between diverse belief systems. What sets Islamic accounts apart is the focus upon Elijah as an exemplar of patience and steadfast perseverance. When the majority of people rejected what he proclaimed, he didn't abandon his sacred responsibility. Rather, he persisted in instructing the small number willing to receive his message, completing his obligation independent of outcomes. Certain Islamic traditions propose that Elijah never died, but continues to exist, having consumed water from the fountain of life. This mirrors the biblical description of his heavenly ascension, but incorporates an aspect of continued earthly existence. Somewhere within this world, conceivably, Elias proceeds upon his journey. This understanding connects to broader Islamic perspectives concerning particular, exceptional figures who surpass typical human constraints. Together with Kidra, frequently linked with hidden understanding, and occasionally Jesus, Elijah belongs among those who anticipate the final age while existing in a condition between mortal life and ultimate judgment. Folk customs throughout Muslim regions contain narratives of meetings with Elias. People traveling speak of encountering an enigmatic stranger offering direction before vanishing. Those fishing in coastal areas sometimes call upon his name, seeking protection, maintaining belief that he possesses unique authority concerning waters and atmospheric conditions. Within Sufi mystical practice, Elijah embodies the ideal spiritual mentor, someone who has moved beyond material preoccupations and can guide others toward divine truth. His wilderness ordeals symbolize the spiritual pilgrimage, requiring detachment from worldly entanglements before deeper truths become accessible. The common veneration for Elijah, spanning Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, establishes bridges of mutual understanding among these traditions. His narrative reminds those who believe that prophetic truth extends beyond cultural divisions, that messengers from God have addressed numerous peoples across numerous eras. Certain medieval Muslim astronomers connected Elijah with heavenly occurrences, particularly specific stars or groupings of stars. His blazing ascension established him as a fitting symbol for cosmic energies, linking earthbound religious narrative with the enigmas of the nighttime sky extending above us. In territories where these belief systems coexist, mutual reverence for Elijah occasionally generates instances of surprising harmony. Sacred locations connected with the prophet receive visits from pilgrims of varying backgrounds. Each arrives bearing their distinct understanding while showing respect for the space they momentarily occupy together. As slumber starts to take hold of your consciousness, contemplate how a single existence lived with intention and documented with attention can touch countless hearts across enormous expanses of time and distance. From ancient Israel extending to this quiet darkness of tonight, Elijah's narrative persists in speaking, bearing witness, and providing inspiration. Allow his journey to accompany you at this moment into dreams where prophets and divine promises merge together within the gentle currents of rest. Peace be upon Elias, and peace be upon you as you drift into sleep. Elijah in written works, from Dante through contemporary fiction. The narrative concerning Elijah has mesmerized writers throughout the ages. His fearless confrontations, enigmatic departure, and deep spiritual dimension provide abundant material for literary creation. During medieval times, Dante positioned Elijah within his divine comedy, depicting him as one among heaven's residents. The prophet makes his appearance in paradise, acknowledged for his fiery rise and steadfast faith. Advancing to the Renaissance period, John Milton incorporated allusions to Elijah in Paradise Lost. Milton constructed parallels between angelic messengers and the prophet who transmitted divine purpose. His characterization highlighted Elijah's function as a voice crying out in the wilderness, summoning people to return to truth amid spiritual disorientation. By the 1800s, writers such as George Eliot wove understated references to Elijah into their novels. In works such as Daniel Deronda, Eliot employed prophetic figures to investigate themes of spiritual reawakening and moral bravery. The prophet transformed into a symbol representing those who oppose corrupt structures, even when facing considerable personal sacrifice. Victorian poets discovered inspiration within Elijah's dramatic life experiences. Christina Rossetti's devotional poetry frequently addressed themes of divine sustenance and supernatural involvement, reflecting Elijah's encounters beside the brook Cherith. Robert Browning, celebrated for his dramatic monologues, investigated the inner psychology of biblical personalities, including prophets who confronted moments of hopelessness, like Elijah beneath the broom tree. Jewish writers held particular affection for Elijah's narratives. Sholem Aleichem wove Elijah folklore into tales that offered comfort throughout challenging periods. These stories presented Elijah as a wanderer materializing unexpectedly to assist the righteous during moments of crisis. The prophet became emblematic of hope and divine presence within daily hardships. Within American literature, Herman Melville utilized biblical imagery, including allusions to prophetic figures in Moby Dick. The character named Elijah, who issues warnings to Ishmael prior to his ocean voyage, carries unmistakable connections to the biblical prophet. This mysterious individual foresees approaching events, comparable to how the original Elijah foretold future ramifications. The 20th century witnessed more psychological investigations of biblical personalities. Novels such as The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, although not explicitly concerning Elijah, derived inspiration from prophetic traditions. Writers commenced examining the internal experiences of those bearing divine messages, portraying the burden of such duties. Present-day fiction persists in exploring Elijah themes through multiple perspectives. Historical novels reconstruct 9th-century Israel, envisioning the political and religious conflicts of Elijah's era. Fantasy authors incorporate elements from his narrative. The ravens, the blazing chariot, the hushed, gentle voice, into fresh mythological settings. Literature for children embraces Elijah with distinctive warmth. Illustrated books portray the feeding by ravens or the competition upon Mount Carmel through vivid imagery. These adaptations emphasize bravery, faith, and divine protection, rendering ancient narratives accessible to youthful readers through streamlined language and captivating storytelling. Across all these literary manifestations, Elijah's narrative continues addressing human hearts. Writers revisit his journey because it resonates with universal experiences. Standing isolated for truth, confronting despair, discovering unanticipated provision, and finally being transported beyond earthly constraints. The prophet's literary presence provides a quiet acknowledgement that our narratives connect to something more expansive than our individual selves. A realization that delivers comfort as sleep approaches. Elijah in visual art. From icons through modern interpretations, the visual representation of Elijah encompasses centuries of artistic creation. Byzantine icon artists initially established his identifiable appearance, bearded, frequently dressed in animal hides, with penetrating eyes reflecting internal fire. These earliest depictions stressed his prophetic authority, presenting him receiving divine communications or confronting worldly powers with composed confidence. Medieval, illuminated manuscripts feature small yet intricate scenes from Elijah's existence. Gold leaf accentuates moments of divine intervention. Fire devouring the sacrifice, ravens delivering bread, the chariot composed of flames. These images materialized alongside biblical text, assisting illiterate worshippers in connecting with sacred narratives through visual representation. Renaissance masters introduced new perspectives to Elijah artwork. Daniele de Volterra's powerful fresco, Elijah in the Chariot of Fire, captures the prophet's energetic ascension through swirling clouds and dramatic illumination, emphasizing the supernatural character of the occurrence. Throughout this era, artists commenced displaying more human emotions within Elijah's expression. Determination upon Mount Carmel, fear during his flight from Jezebel, peaceful surrender throughout his heavenly departure. The Baroque period embraced Elijah's dramatic instances. Rubens painted the prophet Elijah receiving bread and water from an angel, portraying the depleted prophet with compassionate realism while preserving divine magnificence through the angel's presence. These works stressed contrast between illumination and darkness, hopelessness and hope, human constraint and divine potential. Dutch artists like Ferdinand Bol generated intimate scenes of Elijah with the widow of Zarephath, concentrating on human connection instead of supernatural components. These tranquil domestic environments revealed the prophet's compassion, displaying tender moments as he restored the widow's son to life or participated in a humble meal within her residence. Jewish artistic traditions cultivated distinctive approaches to Elijah imagery. Because Jewish law advised caution regarding representing biblical figures directly, artists frequently portrayed Elijah's presence symbolically. An unoccupied chair during Passover, a cup containing wine, or subtle indications within larger compositions. These visual signals reminded observers of the prophet's spiritual presence without attempting to capture his physical appearance. By the 1800s, pre-Raphaelite painters like Lord Frederick Leighton produced abundantly detailed biblical scenes, including Elijah in the wilderness. These works merged historical investigation with romantic sensibility, situating the prophet within carefully rendered Middle Eastern environments while expressing emotional and spiritual profundity. Modern artists have adopted increasingly abstract methods. Marc Chagall incorporated Elijah imagery within his dreamlike biblical scenes, employing floating figures and brilliant colors to imply spiritual reality beyond physical manifestation. Contemporary Jewish artists like Samuel Bach occasionally include subtle Elijah references in intricate paintings, addressing themes of hope amid suffering. Religious communities worldwide preserve traditions of Elijah representation. Ethiopian Christian art presents him within distinctly African environments, while Russian Orthodox icons perpetuate Byzantine traditions, incorporating local modifications. These varied cultural expressions reveal the prophet's universal attraction across geographical divisions. Digital artists presently generate Elijah images for books, films, and interactive media. These contemporary interpretations frequently combine historical investigation with imaginative components, rendering ancient narratives visually accessible to new generations. Whether realistic or stylized, these modern depictions continue the extended tradition of employing visual arts to assist us in perceiving beyond the visible realm. Much as Elijah himself looked past immediate circumstances to discern divine reality. Elijah in musical expression, hymns, oratorios, and traditional songs. Music has provided voice to Elijah's narrative through varied forms across centuries. Perhaps most renowned is Felix Mendelssohn's oratorio Elijah, completed in 1846. This magnificent composition brings the prophet's existence to musical form through rousing choruses, reflective arias, and dramatic recitatives. Mendelssohn captured crucial moments: the drought proclamation, the Mount Carmel confrontation, the hushed, gentle voice with emotional resonance that continues affecting audiences today. Medieval plain chant incorporated selections for observance days connected with the prophet. These uncomplicated, flowing melodies established space for contemplation on Elijah's spiritual importance. Monks within quiet monasteries sang these chants, their voices ascending and descending like the gentle pattern of breathing during rest, linking ancient narratives to present devotion. Folk traditions spanning Jewish communities maintained Elijah melodies transmitted across generations. Throughout Passover celebrations, songs welcomed the prophet's symbolic arrival through joyful, expectant tunes. These melodies frequently employ minor keys, reflecting both anguish and liberation, themes fundamental to Elijah's narrative and Jewish historical experience. Christian hymn composers discovered inspiration within the prophet's journey. The 1800s yielded hymns like Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise, with textual allusions to divine revelation comparable to Elijah's encounter upon Mount Horeb. Others extracted lessons from particular episodes. God's provision, bravery in resistance, hope within despair, setting these themes to memorable melodies for collective worship. African American spirituals occasionally incorporated Elijah imagery, especially his blazing ascension. The spiritual swing low, sweet chariot likely references this moment. These songs employ biblical narratives as coded expression for hope of deliverance, discovering in Elijah a powerful emblem of God's intervention favoring the oppressed. Contemporary composers persist in exploring Elijah themes. Michael Card's present-day Christian song, The Voice of the Lord, reflects upon the hushed, gentle voice experience. Arvo Pärt's minimalist approach generates contemplative spaces, reminiscent of Elijah's desert isolation through repetitive patterns and deliberately positioned silence. Jewish cantorial music incorporates liturgical pieces referencing Elijah's anticipated return. These melodies combine ancient modal structures with emotional expressiveness, singers utilizing vocal embellishment to express yearning for redemption. Throughout circumcision ceremonies, gentle songs welcome Elijah as witness, establishing a musical connection between past, present, and future generations. Film composers have composed scores for biblical epics, incorporating Elijah scenes. These soundtracks employ orchestral color to intensify dramatic moments. Brass instruments for Mount Carmel's victory, delicate strings for ravens delivering food, resounding percussion for the chariot of fire. Even when not explicitly depicting Elijah, wilderness scenes in film music frequently echo themes connected with prophetic isolation and revelation. Children's music streamlines Elijah narratives through memorable melodies and recurring choruses. These songs highlight unforgettable elements: fire descending from heaven, ravens carrying bread, the whirlwind, assisting young listeners in absorbing biblical narratives through music's memory-enhancing capacity. The musical arrangements generate positive connections with these ancient narratives. From magnificent oratorios to uncomplicated lullabies, music persists in carrying Elijah's narrative to listeners spanning all ages. These musical expressions access emotional dimensions that words by themselves might fail to reach, enabling us to experience the prophet's courage, despair, wonder, and peace. As we listen, we receive an invitation into a timeless rhythm, connecting our breathing to the breath of narratives that have sustained faith across innumerable generations. Elijah, in film and digital media. Cinematic representations. The dramatic existence of Elijah supplies abundant material for visual storytelling within film and television productions. Early biblical epics approached his narrative with reverence and spectacle. The 1953 film Queen Jezebel featured Elijah as an authoritative figure confronting royal corruption. These classic productions emphasized grand moments such as the Mount Carmel contest through impressive, if occasionally outdated, special effects displaying fire consuming the water-saturated altar. Television brought Elijah to weekly audiences with series like The Bible, 2013, where actor Diego Morgado portrayed the prophet with intensity and emotional breadth. The visual medium permitted directors to juxtapose Elijah's wilderness isolation against palatial scenes of Ahab and Jezebel, utilizing landscape and architecture to emphasize spiritual conflicts. Desert filming locations generated authentic environments for Elijah's journeys, the severe terrain reinforcing his physical and spiritual trials. Animated adaptations rendered Elijah accessible to children. Series like Superbook and VeggieTales translated complex narratives into colorful, though streamlined, versions maintaining core themes while employing humor and contemporary allusions to engage youthful viewers. These programs frequently emphasize divine provision and bravery, presenting Elijah's human moments of uncertainty alongside his faithful deeds. Documentary filmmakers have investigated Elijah from historical and archaeological viewpoints. Programs examining ancient Israel frequently incorporate segments on 9th-century prophets, utilizing expert interviews, archaeological discoveries, and location footage to position Elijah within historical framework. These documentaries assist viewers in comprehending the political and religious conflicts that influenced his ministry. Independent films have presented more nuanced, character-focused portrayals. Instead of concentrating exclusively on miraculous components, these productions investigate Elijah's psychological journey, his fear, isolation, and moments of uncertainty. By presenting the prophet's humanity, these intimate narratives establish relatable entry points into ancient narratives. Digital media has broadened Elijah's presence through interactive platforms. Bible applications incorporate audio dramatizations featuring voice actors and sound effects, bringing his confrontations and quiet moments to life. Online videos employ animation and contemporary settings to assist new audiences in connecting with prophetic themes of speaking truth before power and discovering divine presence in unexpected locations. Video games occasionally incorporate Elijah-inspired characters or scenarios, echoing his narrative, testing players with challenges, requiring courage against overwhelming circumstances, or quests involving wilderness survival. Although rarely direct adaptations, these interactive narratives utilize prophetic archetypes, resonating across cultural divisions. Social media has produced new forms of Elijah content through brief videos, memes, and artistic interpretations distributed across platforms. These concise, frequently creative expressions distill components of his narrative into formats appropriate for rapid consumption while potentially inspiring deeper investigation. A single powerful image of Elijah confronting the prophets of Baal might ignite curiosity regarding the complete narrative. Middle Eastern filmmakers have contributed cultural authenticity to Elijah portrayals. Productions from territories familiar with desert existence and ancient Near Eastern religious contexts provide insights occasionally absent from Western interpretations. These films frequently demonstrate greater consciousness of the social dynamics and daily realities forming the background to Elijah's ministry. Virtual reality experiences presently permit users to walk upon Mount Carmel or stand within Naboth's vineyard. These immersive technologies establish sensory connections to biblical environments, assisting viewers in feeling physically present within the narrative. As we look ahead toward future media developments, Elijah's timeless narrative persists in discovering expression through each emerging technological medium, communicating across centuries with exceptional resilience. The Enduring Elijah, a narrative transcending time. Elijah's narrative flows similar to a subterranean river through human history, occasionally concealed but perpetually nourishing our shared imagination. What causes this ancient prophet to persist within our consciousness when countless figures disappear? Perhaps it involves the universal components interwoven through his distinctive journey. Standing isolated for truth, confronting dark periods of the soul, discovering unexpected assistance, and finally, surpassing mortal boundaries. His narrative addresses our most profound struggles. When we experience overwhelm from cultural pressures, Elijah reminds us that a single voice holds significance. His confrontation with hundreds of Baal's prophets resonates whenever truth confronts powerful resistance. We recognize our personal moments of bravery, speaking up during meetings, defending principles against popular currents, selecting integrity over expediency, as reflections of his Mount Carmel stance. The prophet's cave encounter addresses our requirement for quietness amid commotion. When Elijah perceived the hushed, gentle voice, he encountered divine presence not within earthquake, wind, or fire, but within gentle murmurs. This reminds us to establish space for listening within our notification-saturated existence. His narrative validates both active participation and contemplative retreat as essential rhythms within a balanced spiritual existence. Elijah addresses our bleakest moments as well. His hopelessness beneath the broom tree, desiring life to conclude, recognizes depression's reality without stigma. The angels who supplied food and rest instead of instant solutions provide wisdom regarding healing through fundamental needs and gentle attention. When experiencing brokenness, this ancient narrative reminds us that restoration frequently commences through simple actions. Consume food, obtain sleep, take walks, then listen. The prophet traverses boundaries that frequently separate us. While solidly established within Jewish tradition, Elijah maintains significance for Christians and Muslims likewise. Within a world quick to stress differences, his narrative establishes common territory for interfaith dialogue. The mutual reverence for Elijah reminds us that spiritual understanding extends beyond any isolated tradition. Children instinctively comprehend elements adults occasionally overlook within Elijah's narrative. They observe the ravens delivering food, nature itself engaging in care. They value the simplicity of the flour container that never became empty, daily provision instead of spectacular wealth. Through children's perspectives, we rediscover amazement in ordinary sustenance and assistance from surprising sources. Elijah's departure within the whirlwind addresses our desire for significant endings. Unlike most biblical personalities whose deaths receive simple recording, Elijah's narrative presents a transcendent conclusion. This enigmatic transition resonates with our hope that life's concluding chapter might constitute not an ending, but a transformation. His narrative whispers that our journeys persist beyond what eyes perceive. The unoccupied chair during Passover Seders magnificently captures Elijah's lasting promise. It represents hope not yet realized, justice still approaching, guests not yet present. This physical symbol embodies faithful anticipation, not passive acceptance, but active expectation. The cup filled yet not consumed reminds us that history remains incomplete, with improved chapters still awaiting composition. What renders Elijah genuinely timeless involves his narrative's flawless balance of strength and vulnerability. He demonstrates that courage doesn't demand feeling without fear, and that conviction can coexist alongside doubt. This integration of seemingly contradictory qualities generates a completely human portrait that each generation recognizes anew. He feels simultaneously like someone from an ancient manuscript and someone we might encounter tomorrow. As we bring closure to this journey through Elijah's legacy, we may be left with the prophet's most lasting contribution, the reminder that we constitute part of something more expansive than ourselves. His narrative connects us to thousands of years of human searching, struggling, failing, and transcending. Similar to a lullaby guiding us towards sleep, Elijah's narrative provides assurance that we remain held within an ancient, continuing story that proceeds long after our eyes close. Within this gentle understanding, we can find rest,